Elena Moretti's hands trembled as she poured wine at table 7, the VIP booth where silence meant power and every glance carried weight. She'd kept her head down for 2 years, invisible in New York's most exclusive Italian restaurant. Then her phone rang. Her grandmother's nurse calling from Florence. Elena answered in rapid Italian, flawless, native, unthinking. The room went silent. At the head of the table, Marco De Luca's dark eyes locked onto her, and Elena knew her carefully constructed anonymity had just shattered. She'd spent 2 years hiding. He'd found her in 30 seconds. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this story, please hit the like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels across the world. 1. The winter wind cut through Manhattan like a blade, turning the streets into corridors of ice and shadow. Elena Moretti pulled her coat tighter as she hurried toward Osteria Luminosa, the kind of restaurant where reservations required 3 months' notice and discretion was more valuable than gold. She was 20 minutes early for her shift, but punctuality was survival when you were trying to disappear. The warm interior embraced her as she stepped inside, the scent of truffle oil and aged wine replacing the bitter cold. Soft lighting reflected off crystal glasses and white tablecloths, creating an atmosphere of understated luxury. Elena moved through the familiar space with practiced efficiency, her movements economical, her presence deliberately forgettable. Elena. Giancarlo, the floor manager, caught her arm as she tied her apron. His expression was tense. Table 7 tonight. VIP reservation. Private party. Her stomach tightened. Table 7 was the corner booth, secluded and expensive, reserved for people who valued privacy above all else. How many guests? 8, maybe more. Giancarlo lowered his voice. Marco De Luca's party. The name meant nothing to Elena, but the way Giancarlo said it, with careful neutrality that barely masked anxiety, told her everything she needed to know. Powerful, dangerous. The kind of man who moved through the world with absolute certainty that it would bend to accommodate him. I understand, she said quietly. No mistakes tonight. Perfect service. Invisible service. Giancarlo's eyes held hers. These are not men who enjoy being noticed. Elena nodded. She'd been invisible for 2 years. One more night wouldn't be difficult. The evening began with mechanical precision. Elena prepared table 7 with meticulous care. Fresh linens, precisely aligned silverware, water glasses positioned exactly 3 inches from the knife's tip. The restaurant filled with the usual clientele, hedge fund managers, real estate developers, the occasional celebrity seeking privacy and excellent food. At 8:15, Marco De Luca arrived. Elena was refilling water glasses at table 4 when she saw him enter. He moved with the kind of confidence that couldn't be taught. A tall man in his late 30s, dark hair styled with careless precision, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. But it wasn't his appearance that made Elena's breath catch. It was the way the room shifted around him, conversations dropping to murmurs, staff straightening unconsciously, as if his presence created its own gravity. 2 men flanked him, clearly security despite their expensive suits. 3 more followed, then another 2. All of them moved to table 7 with choreographed precision, filling the booth and the surrounding chairs. Giancarlo appeared at Elena's elbow. You're up. Remember, invisible. She approached the table with water pitchers and menus, her eyes downcast, her movements practiced. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Osteria Luminosa. No one acknowledged her. They were already deep in conversation, a mixture of English and Italian that flowed like water between languages. Elena began filling glasses, her presence as unremarkable as furniture. Marco De Luca sat at the head of the table, his position making it clear who commanded this gathering. He wasn't the loudest voice or the most animated speaker. He didn't need to be. When he spoke, others listened. When he was silent, they waited. Elena moved around the table, taking drink orders in a quiet voice, her accent carefully neutral. American with just enough practice to pronounce Italian wines correctly. She'd worked hard to sand down her native fluency, to sound like someone who'd learned the language from textbooks, rather than growing up in the hills outside Florence. The evening progressed with tense smoothness. Elena brought appetizers, cleared plates, refilled glasses. She learned to read the table's rhythm, when to approach, when to stay back, when her presence would be an intrusion. The men discussed business in careful terms, nothing explicit, everything understood. And Marco De Luca watched. She felt his gaze occasionally, brief moments when his attention flickered to her as she worked. Not predatory or inappropriate, simply observant, as if he were cataloging details, filing away information for later use. At 9:30, her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. Elena's heart stuttered. She'd left strict instructions with everyone who had this number: family, the few friends she'd kept in contact with, her grandmother's care facility. Call only in emergencies. The phone vibrated again, insistent. She glanced at Giancarlo, who was occupied with another table. The booth was engaged in heated discussion, voices rising slightly. No one would notice if she stepped away for 30 seconds. Elena slipped into the narrow hallway leading to the kitchen, pulling out her phone with trembling fingers. The number on the screen was international. Italy, Florence. Pronto? Her voice was barely a whisper. Elena? E Giulia. Mi dispiace chiamare. The nurse's voice was strained, apologetic, urgent. Cosa è successo? Elena's carefully maintained accent dissolved instantly, her native Florentine Italian flowing without thought. E la nonna? Si è aggravata. I dottori dicono non molto tempo. Giorni, forse. Mi dispiace tanto. The words hit like physical blows. Her grandmother, the woman who'd raised her, who'd sacrificed everything to give Elena opportunities, who'd told her to run to America and never look back. Dying. Days left, maybe. Arrivo, Elena whispered, her throat tight. Trovo il modo. Arrivo. She hung up, leaning against the wall, trying to breathe through the sudden weight crushing her chest. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. Not here. Not now. When Elena turned to go back to the dining room, she froze. Marco De Luca stood 10 feet away, perfectly still in the dim hallway. Their eyes met, and Elena's carefully constructed world crumbled. He'd heard everything. Every word of her flawless Italian, the regional accent she'd spent 2 years hiding, the desperation in her voice. His expression revealed nothing, but his dark eyes held hers with unsettling intensity. I'm sorry, Elena managed, her American accent feeling fake and clumsy now. I'll return to my tables. Your grandmother is dying. His voice was quiet, barely above a murmur, but it cut through her attempted deflection with surgical precision. He spoke in English, but his own Italian accent was unmistakable. Northern, educated, cultured. Elena's hands clenched at her sides. I apologize for the disruption. It won't happen again. How long have you been in New York? He moved closer, not threatening, simply closing the distance between them. 2 years. The truth came out before she could stop it. And before that? I don't see how Florence. It wasn't a question. You have the accent, the rhythm. Tuscan Hills, probably. Small town outside the city. Elena's pulse hammered in her ears. This wasn't casual observation. This was assessment, evaluation, the kind of attention she'd spent 2 years avoiding. Sir, I really should. Your name isn't Elena Moretti. Marco's eyes never left hers. Or rather, it is, but not the one you were born with. You changed it, legally, about 18 months ago. The hallway seemed to shrink. How do you... Because when someone appears in my city, working in my favorite restaurant, speaking perfect American English and pretending not to understand Italian conversations, I make it my business to know who they are. His tone remained calm, almost conversational, especially when they're very, very good at being invisible. Elena's mind raced. Run. The instinct screamed through her veins, but running would confirm everything he suspected. I'm just a waitress, she said quietly. No. Marco tilted his head slightly. You're a woman who's hiding, and you're very skilled at it, which makes me wonder what you're hiding from. I'm not hiding from anything illegal. The words came out stronger than she felt. I believe you. He paused. Your grandmother doesn't have much time. The sudden shift in topic nearly broke her composure. Elena swallowed hard. No. You can't afford the flight. It wasn't a question. He was stating facts, connecting pieces. Elena lifted her chin. I'll find a way. Yes. Marco reached into his jacket, retrieving a business card. He held it out to her. You will. Elena stared at the card without taking it. Heavy stock, embossed lettering, just a name and a phone number. I don't understand. My table is finishing dessert. When your shift ends, you'll come to my office. The address is on the back. Marco's voice held absolute certainty. We have things to discuss. I appreciate the offer, but I don't. This isn't an offer, Elena. He said her name carefully, precisely. It's a conversation that needs to happen. Tonight. Before she could respond, he turned and walked back toward the dining room, leaving her holding the business card she didn't remember taking. Elena stood alone in the hallway, her heart pounding, her grandmother dying across an ocean, and the careful anonymity she'd built crumbling around her. She looked down at the card. On the back, written in precise handwriting, was an address in Midtown and a time, 11:30 p.m. Mutsang. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Elena moved through her duties on autopilot, serving drinks and clearing plates while her mind raced through possibilities and escapes. Every time she glanced at table 7, Marco was engaged in conversation, giving no indication their hallway exchange had occurred. But she felt his awareness of her like heat against her skin. At 11:15, Marco's party settled their bill. Cash, naturally, an envelope that Giancarlo accepted with a respectful nod, and departed. Elena watched them leave through the restaurant's front windows, a convoy of black cars waiting at the curb. You okay? Giancarlo asked, studying her face. Fine. Elena untied her apron with mechanical movements. Just tired. They tip well? She hadn't checked. Elena looked in the envelope Giancarlo had set aside for her, her share of the gratuity. $500. Very well, she whispered. By 11:20, she stood on the freezing sidewalk outside Osteria Luminosa, her coat wrapped tight, staring at the address on Marco's card. Every instinct screamed at her to go home, pack her few belongings, and disappear again. She'd done it before. She could do it again. But her grandmother had days left, maybe hours. And Marco De Luca clearly had resources, money, connections, the kind of power that made problems disappear. Elena pulled out her phone and searched the address. A building in Midtown, expensive and discreet, the kind of place where serious business happened away from public eyes. She checked the time, 11:23. 7 minutes to decide if she was walking into opportunity or disaster. The taxi ride took 12 minutes. Elena watched the meter climb, calculating how much this would cost, how much she had left in her carefully hoarded savings. Not enough for a last-minute flight to Florence. Not nearly enough. The building was understated elegance. Limestone facade, brass fixtures, a doorman who nodded as if he'd been expecting her. 23rd floor, he said simply. The elevator was mirror-polished steel and soft lighting. Elena watched her reflection rise, seeing a woman who looked tired, scared, and desperate. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin. Desperation made you vulnerable. Desperation made you make mistakes. The elevator opened onto a private hallway with a single door. It opened before she could knock. The man who answered wasn't Marco, one of the security detail from dinner, tall and expressionless. He stepped aside wordlessly, gesturing her into a space that redefined her understanding of office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan, the city spread out like scattered diamonds. The furniture was modern and minimal, all clean lines and expensive materials. Art that Elena suspected was original hung on dark walls. Marco stood by the windows, his jacket removed, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He held a glass of amber liquid, whiskey probably, something aged and expensive. Thank you for coming. He gestured to a leather chair facing his desk. Please sit. Elena remained standing. What is this? A conversation. Marco moved to his desk, setting down the whiskey. He opened a drawer and withdrew a manila folder. About your grandmother, Lucia Rossini, age 78, currently in hospice care at Santa Maria Nuova Hospital in Florence. Advanced stage 4 cancer, approximately 3 to 5 days remaining. Elena's breath caught. How do you... About you, Elena Rossini, your real name. Born in Greve in Chianti, raised by your grandmother after your parents died in a car accident when you were 6. Full scholarship to University of Florence, degree in linguistics with specialization in simultaneous translation. You worked for the regional government briefly, then disappeared 18 months ago. Marco's eyes lifted from the folder. And then Elena Moretti appeared in New York, working at a restaurant, pretending her Italian was learned from books. The room seemed to tilt. Elena gripped the back of the chair. You had me investigated. The moment I saw you at the restaurant 3 months ago, yes. Marco closed the folder. I recognize skill when I see it, and you're very skilled at being invisible. That kind of skill suggests training or necessity. I'm not running from anything illegal. Her voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her. I know. I had that checked thoroughly. Marco poured a second glass of whiskey, offering it to her. You're running from a man, Antonio Greco, former regional councilman, currently under investigation for corruption and embezzlement. You were his translator during international meetings. Elena's hand trembled as she accepted the glass. She didn't drink. Greco became obsessed with you, Marco continued, his voice clinical, factual. When you refused his advances, he made your life impossible. Destroyed your career, threatened your grandmother. You had 2 choices, submit or disappear. So I disappeared. Elena met his eyes. And I'd like to stay disappeared. That's not going to be possible. Marco leaned against his desk, arms crossed. Greco has connections, money. He's looking for you. Not actively anymore. But if you show up in Italy, especially in Florence, he'll know within hours. The whiskey glass felt heavy in Elena's hand. Then I won't go. Your grandmother is dying. I'm aware. The words came out sharper than she intended. Marco studied her for a long moment. I'm going to make you an offer. You can refuse if you choose, but I'd suggest you hear me out completely before deciding. Elena said nothing. I need a translator. Someone fluent in Italian and English, familiar with both business and cultural nuances. Someone discreet, intelligent, and capable of reading subtext. Marco's eyes never left hers. I'm going to Italy in 3 days for a series of meetings. Florence, Rome, Milan. The trip will last approximately 10 days. You want to hire me? I want to employ you temporarily as my personal translator. All expenses paid, travel, accommodation, everything. In exchange, you'll attend meetings with me, translate accurately, and maintain complete discretion about anything you hear. Elena's mind raced through the implications. And in return? You'll be in Florence when your grandmother needs you, under my protection, which means Greco won't touch you. Marco's voice was matter-of-fact. You'll have access to private transportation, secure accommodation, and enough money to ensure your grandmother's final days are comfortable. It was too generous, too perfect. What's the catch? The catch is that the meetings I attend aren't always simple business discussions. The people I meet with aren't always simple businessmen. Marco's expression didn't change. You'll hear things, see things, and you'll never speak of them to anyone, ever. Elena's stomach tightened. You're asking me to become complicit in something illegal. I'm asking you to translate conversations and keep your mouth shut. Marco poured himself more whiskey. What I do isn't your concern. Your concern is your grandmother and staying alive long enough to say goodbye. The bluntness was almost refreshing. No pretense, no soft lies, just cold reality. Why me? Elena asked quietly. You could hire any translator. Better ones probably. Because you're already invisible. Because you're already running. Because you understand the value of discretion from personal experience. Marco's eyes held hers. And because when I heard you speak Italian in that hallway, I heard something I rarely encounter. Absolute authenticity. You don't perform the language. You breathe it. Elena looked down at the whiskey, watching the light refract through the amber liquid. If I refuse? Then you walk out of here, continue your life as Elena Moretti, and hope you can scrape together enough money for a flight before your grandmother dies alone. Marco's voice was clinical. Greco's investigation will probably collapse eventually. You might be able to return to Italy in a few years. Maybe. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. And if I accept? Then you pack a bag tonight. Tomorrow you'll meet with my attorney to sign an NDA and employment contract. We leave for Italy on Friday morning, private flight. You'll have 12 hours with your grandmother before the first meeting. Marco straightened. After 10 days, you return to New York with $25,000, enough to disappear properly if you choose, or enough to start over somewhere visible. $25,000. More money than Elena had seen in 2 years. I need to think about it. The words felt weak. No, you don't. Marco's certainty was absolute. You need to decide if you're willing to trade 10 days of complicity for a chance to say goodbye and a future that isn't built on fear. Elena's hands clenched around the glass. You're not giving me a real choice. I'm giving you the only choice that matters, agency over your circumstances. Marco moved to the window, looking out at the glittering city. Everything else is just details. She hated that he was right, hated that he'd found her, investigated her, laid bare all her careful secrets, hated that he held all the cards and was offering her exactly what she needed most. I want guarantees, Elena said quietly, in writing, about my grandmother's care. Already drafted, Marco gestured to the folder on his desk. Medical expenses, private room, whatever she needs. The hospice administrator has already been contacted and provided with an account number. Before I even agreed, Elena's voice was flat. I don't make offers I'm not prepared to follow through on. Marco turned to face her. This benefits us both. You get closure and financial security. I get a skilled translator who understands the stakes. Elena set down the untouched whiskey. What time tomorrow? 10 a.m., this address. Bring identification and your passport. Marco pulled a phone from his pocket, typing rapidly. I'm having a car sent to your apartment. It'll wait outside until you're packed. I haven't agreed yet, but they both knew she had. Yes, you have. Marco's expression was unreadable. You agreed the moment you walked through that door, Elena. Everything since has just been negotiating the terms you can live with. She wanted to argue, to assert some control over this situation spiraling beyond her grasp. But he was right. He'd been right about everything. Her desperation, her skills, her absolute lack of real options. I'll see you tomorrow. Elena moved toward the door. Elena. She stopped, not turning. Don't try to run. Marco's voice was quiet but edged with steel. I found you once. I can find you again. And next time I might not be offering employment. Elena looked back at him, this man who'd dismantled her carefully constructed anonymity in a single evening. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Marco's eyes held hers. I invest resources in people I employ. I protect my investments. As long as you're working for me, you're safe. If you run, you're on your own, and Greco is still looking. The security guard appeared, opening the door. Elena walked out without another word, her mind churning through everything that had just happened. In the elevator, she let herself shake. By the time she reached the street, she'd steadied. A black town car waited at the curb, exactly as Marco had promised. The driver opened the door without speaking. Elena climbed in, giving her address in a voice that didn't waver. The city slid past the tinted windows, millions of lights hiding millions of secrets. Somewhere in those towers of steel and glass, Antonio Greco's corruption investigation was grinding forward. Somewhere across an ocean, her grandmother was dying in a hospital room. And somewhere behind her, Marco De Luca was probably pouring another whiskey, satisfied that his newest acquisition had accepted the terms. Elena pulled out her phone, looking at the last message from Giulia, the hospice nurse. Mi dispiace tanto. She typed a response. Arrivo. 3 giorni. Per favore, dille che arrivo. The reply came almost instantly. Glielo dico. Sarà felice. Elena closed her eyes, leaning back against the leather seat. She'd spent 2 years invisible, running from a man who'd tried to own her. Now she was walking voluntarily into employment with a man who clearly operated in shadows deeper than she could imagine. But she'd be in Florence. She'd hold her grandmother's hand. She'd say goodbye. Whatever price that required, she'd pay it. The car stopped outside her apartment building, a walk-up in Queens, cheap and anonymous. Elena climbed the stairs to her studio, unlocking 3 separate deadbolts. Inside, her life fit into 2 suitcases. She began to pack. Outside, the black car waited, engine idling, the driver patient and still. 3 days until Italy. 3 days until she stepped back into the life she'd fled, protected by a man whose power she didn't understand and whose motives she couldn't read. Elena folded her clothes with mechanical precision, her hands steady, her mind already in Florence, already at her grandmother's bedside. The waitress who'd been invisible for 2 years was about to become very, very visible. And somewhere in the shadows, Marco De Luca was already planning his next move. The morning arrived with the kind of cold that made breathing painful. Elena stood in her small apartment surrounded by packed suitcases, watching dawn break over Queens through her single window. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her grandmother's face, heard Marco De Luca's voice cutting through her defenses with surgical precision. The black car appeared at 9:30, exactly as promised. Elena carried her bags down herself, refusing the driver's offer of assistance. Control the small things, she told herself. The large things were already spinning beyond her reach. The drive to Midtown took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Elena watched the city transform from residential neighborhoods to towering corporate monuments, each block reminding her how far she'd fallen from the life she'd planned. At 28, she should have been building a career, not running from men who believed money bought ownership of everything, including people. The building looked different in daylight, less intimidating, more simply expensive. The doorman recognized her, directing her to a different floor this time. 15th level, corner office. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area where a woman in her 40s sat behind a sleek desk, her expression professionally neutral. Elena Rossini? The woman's Italian accent was Milan, cultured and precise. Mr. De Luca is expecting you. This way, please. They walked through corridors lined with abstract art and closed doors. Elena caught glimpses of people working in glass-walled offices, the kind of legitimate business that probably funded whatever Marco actually did in the shadows. The woman stopped at a heavy wooden door, knocking twice before opening it. "Miss Rossini, sir." Marco's office was different from the space she'd seen last night. Brighter, more lived in. Books lined one wall, their spines showing wear from actual reading rather than decorative arrangement. A second desk held multiple computer screens displaying what looked like financial data and news feeds in several languages. Marco stood as she entered, wearing charcoal slacks and a white dress shirt, no jacket. He looked less intimidating in daylight, more like a successful businessman than the dangerous figure from last night's shadows. "Elena, thank you for being prompt." He gestured to a conference table where another man sat, thin and gray-haired, surrounded by documents. "This is Thomas Brightwell, my attorney. He'll walk you through the employment contract and non-disclosure agreement." The attorney stood, offering his hand. His grip was firm, professional. "Miss Rossini, please sit. This shouldn't take long." It took 90 minutes. Thomas explained every clause with methodical thoroughness. Employment terms, compensation structure, confidentiality requirements, and consequences for breach of contract. The NDA was comprehensive to the point of being suffocating. Elena couldn't discuss Marco's business dealings, his associates, locations visited, or conversations overheard. The restriction extended indefinitely, well beyond the 10-day employment period. "This is extensive," Elena said quietly, reading through the penalty clauses. Breach of contract could result in lawsuits, criminal charges, financial ruin. "Mr. De Luca's business requires absolute discretion." Thomas's voice was matter-of-fact. "These protections ensure mutual understanding of expectations. It also ensures I can't testify against him if something illegal occurs." Elena looked up at Marco, who stood by the windows, seemingly absorbed in his phone, but clearly listening to every word. "It ensures you understand the seriousness of the commitment you're making," Marco said without turning. "And yes, it protects me. But it also protects you. Everything you sign today is attorney-client privileged. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, it's sealed." Elena studied the contract again. The compensation was staggering, $25,000 for 10 days of work, plus all expenses. Her grandmother's medical bills would be covered completely, no limits specified. What if I witness something I can't morally accept? She asked. Thomas and Marco exchanged glances. The attorney cleared his throat. The contract stipulates that you may terminate employment at any time. However, the NDA remains in effect regardless. So I can leave, but I can never speak. Correct. Marco finally turned to face her. That's the trade, Elena. Financial security and your grandmother's care in exchange for permanent silence. Once you sign, you're bound to that silence whether you work for me for 10 days or 10 minutes. It was the ultimate trap, perfectly constructed. The moment she signed, she became complicit through enforced silence. But without signing, she had nothing. No flight to Italy, no money for her grandmother's care, no protection from Greco. Elena picked up the pen. Where do I sign? Are you certain? Thomas asked, his professional mask slipping slightly to show genuine concern. Once these documents are executed, I'm certain. Elena signed her name in 3 places, initialing 7 more. Each stroke of the pen felt like closing a door she'd never be able to reopen. Marco watched her sign without expression. When she finished, Thomas gathered the documents efficiently, sliding copies into a leather portfolio. Welcome aboard, Miss Rossini. The attorney's voice was carefully neutral. Mr. DeLuca will brief you on travel arrangements. My contact information is in your packet should you have questions. After Thomas left, the office felt smaller. Elena remained seated at the conference table, hands folded, waiting. Marco poured 2 glasses of water from a carafe, setting one in front of her. We leave tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Private airfield in Teterboro. Pack for 10 days, business casual primarily. Bring appropriate attire for one formal dinner. Where exactly are we going? Elena sipped the water, her throat suddenly dry. Florence first. You'll have tonight and tomorrow afternoon with your grandmother. Marco sat across from her, his dark eyes unreadable. The first meeting is tomorrow evening, dinner with Salvatore Costa and his associates. Elena's water glass froze halfway to her lips. Salvatore Costa, the industrialist. Among other things, yes. Marco's slight smile suggested he'd noticed her reaction. You know of him? Everyone in Italy knows of him. His family owns half of Tuscany's manufacturing sector. Elena set down the glass carefully. They also have rumored connections to organizations that operate outside traditional business structures, Marco finished. Yes, that's why I need a translator who won't faint at implied threats or veiled negotiations. Elena's stomach tightened. You're meeting with the Mafia. I'm meeting with businessmen who have diverse interests and complicated relationships. Marco's voice remained calm. Your job is to translate accurately, not to judge or interpret beyond the literal meaning of words. And if they say something that implies illegal activity, you translate it. You say nothing. You remember nothing. Marco leaned forward slightly. This is exactly why the NDA is so comprehensive. The people I meet with don't tolerate loose tongues or moral grandstanding. Elena thought of her grandmother dying in a hospital bed, thought of 2 years spent invisible, afraid, running from a man who destroyed her career because she'd said no, thought of the contract she'd just signed, binding her to silence about things she hadn't even witnessed yet. I understand, she said quietly. Do you? Marco studied her face. Because once we're in Italy, once you're sitting across from men like Costa, there's no backing out, no changing your mind. You're either all in or you're a liability. And what happens to liabilities? They stop being problems. Marco's tone didn't change, but the implication was crystal clear. Elena met his eyes. I signed your contract, I'll do the job, but don't mistake compliance for stupidity. I know exactly what I'm agreeing to. Something flickered in Marco's expression. Not quite approval, but perhaps respect. Good. Stupidity gets people killed. Intelligence keeps them useful. He stood, moving to his desk and retrieving another folder. This contains background on the people we'll be meeting. Read it on the plane, memorize names, faces, relationships. Some of these men are sensitive about protocol and respect. Elena took the folder. It was thick, heavy with information. Your grandmother, Marco continued, pulling out his phone and typing rapidly. I've arranged for private care starting today. Lucia will have round-the-clock attention, pain management, and anything else she needs. The hospice has been instructed to contact you directly with any changes in her condition. Thank you. The words felt inadequate. Don't thank me. You're earning it. Marco's eyes lifted from his phone. The car outside will take you home. Pack, rest if you can. We have a long flight tomorrow and an even longer evening ahead. Elena stood, folder clutched against her chest. At the door, she paused. Why me? Really, you could have hired someone with experience in this world, someone who wouldn't need all the explanations. Marco considered the question for a long moment. Because people with experience in this world have loyalties, debts, histories. You have none of those. You're a blank slate with extraordinary skills and motivation to keep your mouth shut. He tilted his head slightly. Plus, you're intelligent enough to be afraid but not paralyzed by it. That's rarer than you'd think. Elena nodded slowly. I'll see you tomorrow morning. 6 a.m. sharp, don't be late. The drive back to Queens felt surreal. Elena read through the folder's contents, her translator's mind automatically cataloging information. Salvatore Costa, 62, widowed, 3 sons involved in various aspects of the family business. Suspected ties to organized crime, never convicted. Known for being traditional, formal, and absolutely ruthless with those who disrespected him. The other names were similarly loaded with implications: politicians, businessmen, and individuals whose Wikipedia pages ended with phrases like alleged connections and unsubstantiated rumors. Back in her apartment, Elena packed methodically. Conservative dresses, professional blazers, 1 black cocktail dress for the formal dinner. She included the small things that made her feel grounded. Her grandmother's rosary, a photo from her university graduation, the battered copy of Dante's Inferno she'd carried since childhood. Her phone rang at 3 p.m. Italian number, the hospice. Pronto? Elena's voice was tight. Elena cara, è Giulia. The nurse's voice was warm despite the circumstances. Your grandmother is awake and comfortable. The new care arrangements. My God, Elena, what did you do? They've moved her to a private suite. The doctors are amazed. I found work. Good work. Elena sat on her bed, surrounded by half-packed suitcases. I'm coming tomorrow. I'll be there by evening. She'll be so happy. We told her you were coming and she actually smiled. First time in days. Giulia's voice softened. However long you can stay, Cara, it will mean everything. I'll stay as long as I can. Elena's throat tightened. Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm coming home. After hanging up, Elena allowed herself 5 minutes of tears. Then she washed her face, finished packing, and ordered food she couldn't taste. The rest of the evening passed in mechanical preparation. She reviewed the folder's contents until she could recite the key player's information from memory. She practiced her breathing, her composure, her ability to sit silent and invisible. At midnight, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, knowing sleep wouldn't come. Tomorrow she'd be on a private plane with a man who operated in shadows. Tomorrow she'd be back in Italy, the country she'd fled, protected by someone who might be more dangerous than the man she'd run from. But tomorrow, she'd also hold her grandmother's hand. Elena closed her eyes and counted the hours until dawn. The car arrived at 5:30 a.m., the driver silent and efficient with her luggage. The drive to Teterboro took less than 40 minutes in the pre-dawn darkness. The private airfield was exactly what Elena had imagined. Understated wealth, discreet service, and the kind of security that didn't advertise its presence but was unmistakably there. Marco waited by a sleek jet, speaking with the pilots. He wore dark jeans and a black sweater, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him. When Elena approached, he ended his conversation and turned to her. Right on time. Good. He gestured to the plane. We'll be wheels up in 15 minutes. There's breakfast on board. The interior was luxury bordering on obscene. Cream leather seats, polished wood accents, and enough space to host a small party. Elena chose a seat by the window, buckling in as the crew performed final checks. Marco sat across from her, already opening his laptop. We'll land in Florence around 8 p.m. local time. Direct route, approximately 9 hours with winds. Use the time to rest. Tonight will be demanding. The takeoff was smooth, the city falling away beneath them. Elena watched New York disappear into clouds and distance, feeling the weight of what she'd agreed to settle more firmly on her shoulders. An hour into the flight, Marco closed his laptop. Tell me about Greco. Elena's head snapped up. What? Antonio Greco, The man you're running from. Marco's expression was neutral. I read the file my investigator compiled, but I want to hear it from you. The real story, not the sanitized version. Elena's hands clenched in her lap. Why does it matter? Because I need to know if he's still a threat. If he'll be a problem while you're in Italy. Marco leaned back, giving her space but demanding answers. And because the people we're meeting tonight will likely know about him, better I hear your version before they test you with theirs. The logic was sound, even if Elena hated it. She took a slow breath. I met him when I was 24, fresh out of university. The regional government hired me as a translator for international business delegations. Greco was one of the councilmen overseeing trade relationships. And he became interested in you. Obsessed. The word tasted bitter. At first it was professional interest. I was good at my job, made his meetings run smoothly. Then it became personal. Gifts, invitations to dinner, increasingly inappropriate comments. Marco listened without interruption, his focus complete. I refused him politely at first, then firmly, then I filed a formal complaint with HR. Elena's voice remained steady through force of will. That's when things got dangerous. Suddenly my work had errors I never made but couldn't prove I hadn't. My security clearance was questioned. Colleagues started avoiding me. He used his position to isolate you. And when isolation didn't work, he escalated, showed up at my apartment, followed me to my grandmother's house. Elena's hands were white-knuckled. He told me I could make it all stop. All I had to do was be reasonable, be grateful for his attention. You ran instead. I documented everything I could, handed it to an investigative journalist, changed my name legally, and disappeared. Elena met Marco's eyes. The investigation is still ongoing, but Greco has money and connections. Even if he's convicted, it'll take years. Marco was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, Salvatore Costa knows Greco. They've done business together. Elena's blood went cold. What? Not closely, but they move in overlapping circles. Marco's voice was matter-of-fact. Costa will know you're from Florence, will likely know about Greco's current legal problems. He may even know about you specifically if Greco mentioned his translator trouble to the wrong people. Then why are you bringing me? Elena's voice rose slightly. If they know, because Costa respects strength, not fear. If he tests you about Greco, you answer honestly and without shame. You did nothing wrong. You reported corruption and removed yourself from a dangerous situation. Marco's eyes held hers. Greco is the one who should be ashamed. Make sure Costa understands that. Elena forced herself to breathe normally. And if Costa is loyal to Greco? He's not. Costa values competence and integrity in his business dealings. Greco is neither competent nor integral. He's a liability waiting to implode. Marco's slight smile was sharp. Costa may even appreciate the opportunity to distance himself from Greco before the investigation concludes. It was manipulation built on manipulation, layers of strategy Elena could barely follow. You're using me as a statement. I'm using your skills as a translator and your history as evidence that I employ people of substance. Marco returned to his laptop. What Costa chooses to infer from that is his business. The plane hummed through the sky, carrying them toward Europe, and consequences Elena couldn't fully predict. She pulled out the folder, reviewing the information again, memorizing Costa's family structure, his business interests, the careful language of men who never said anything directly incriminating. Somewhere over the Atlantic, exhaustion finally claimed her. Elena dozed fitfully, her dreams filled with her grandmother's voice and Marco's dark eyes and Antonio Greco's threats. She woke to Marco shaking her shoulder gently. We're landing in 20 minutes. There's a bathroom in the back if you want to freshen up. Elena stumbled to the rear of the plane, splashing water on her face and changing into one of her professional dresses. Navy blue, conservative, expensive enough to show respect, but not so expensive as to seem presumptuous. She fixed her hair, applied minimal makeup, and stared at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was Elena Rossini again, not Elena Moretti. The waitress was gone. In her place stood someone who'd signed away her silence for blood money and a chance to say goodbye. The descent into Florence's Peretola airport was smooth. Through the window, Elena saw the Tuscan hills she'd grown up in. The terracotta roofs and cypress trees that meant home in a way New York never could. They cleared customs with remarkable speed. Marco's connections apparently extended to Italian border control. A car waited on the tarmac, black and expensive and familiar. The same kind of car that had waited outside her apartment in Queens. "We're going to the hospital first," Marco said as they settled into the back seat. "You have 3 hours with your grandmother. I'll conduct some preliminary business, then collect you at 7. The dinner with Costa begins at 8:30. Elena wanted to argue that 3 hours wasn't enough, but she knew better. Marco was giving her what he'd promised, time to say goodbye. That it came with conditions was simply the price of the transaction. The drive to Santa Maria Nuova took 30 minutes through evening traffic. Florence looked different than she remembered, more crowded, more tourist-filled, but still achingly beautiful. The Duomo rose against the darkening sky, a monument to faith and ambition. The hospital's private wing was quiet, expensive, and far removed from the public wards where most Florentines received care. Marco walked Elena to the nurse's station, where Julia waited. "Elena!" The nurse embraced her warmly. "Your grandmother has been asking for you all day. Come, come." Marco stayed behind, speaking quietly with the floor supervisor. Elena followed Julia down a hushed corridor to a private suite filled with flowers and soft lighting. And there, in the bed, impossibly small and fragile, was Lucia Rossini. Elena's carefully maintained composure shattered. She crossed the room in 3 strides, taking her grandmother's hand with infinite gentleness. "Nonna," she whispered. "Sono qui. Sono tornata." Lucia's eyes opened, still sharp despite the illness ravaging her body. A smile transformed her worn face. "Mia cara, mia Elena, sei venuta." "Certo che sono venuta." Elena brushed white hair from her grandmother's forehead, tears streaming freely now. "Com potevo non venire?" They spoke in rapid Italian, 2 years of separation dissolving in minutes of whispered conversation. Lucia asked about America, about Elena's life, about whether she'd been happy. Elena lied and told her yes. "Non mentirmi, bambina." Lucia's grip was surprisingly strong. "I can see it in your eyes. You've been hiding, running." "It doesn't matter now." Elena pulled a chair close to the bed. "I'm here. That's what matters." Lucia studied her granddaughter's face with the intensity of someone cataloging details for memory. "The man who brought you, the one talking to the nurses outside. He's powerful, dangerous." Elena shouldn't have been surprised her grandmother could read situations so clearly, even now. "Yes. And you work for him." "Temporarily, just this trip." Elena squeezed the frail hand. "He's helping me be here with you." "Nothing is free, cara, especially help from dangerous men." Lucia's eyes drifted closed briefly. "What does he want in return?" "My skills, my silence, nothing I can't give." "Make sure that's true." Lucia's voice was fading. "Make sure you don't trade yourself away again. Not for me, not for anyone." Elena pressed her grandmother's hand to her cheek. "I'm just translating, Nonna. That's all." They talked for hours, not about illness or death, but about memories. Lucia's childhood in the countryside, Elena's parents before the accident, university stories, and small rebellions. The past felt more real than the future, more solid than the present. At 6:45, Julia appeared in the doorway. "Elena cara, your employer is here." Elena stood reluctantly. "I have to go for a few hours. A work obligation. But I'll be back tonight, I promise." "Go?" Lucia's smile was tired but genuine. "Do your work. Be smart. Be strong. And come back to tell me about it." Elena kissed her grandmother's forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender soap and age. "Ti voglio bene, nonna. Anch'io, bambina. Anch'io." In the hallway, Marco waited with the same patient stillness he seemed to carry everywhere. "Ready?" Elena wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and nodded. "Yes." "Good, because Salvatore Costa doesn't tolerate tardiness or weakness." Marco's voice was quiet but firm. From this moment until we return to this hospital, you're not a granddaughter saying goodbye. You're my translator, professional, competent, and completely impartial. Understand? I understand. Elena's voice was steady again. They walked to the car together, leaving the hospital's warmth for the cool Florentine evening. The city lights sparkled like scattered jewels, beautiful and indifferent to the dramas unfolding within it. Marco handed her a small earpiece as they drove. If Costa or his men speak too quickly, or if you need clarification on context, touch your left ear. I'll slow the conversation. If you feel threatened, touch your right ear. We leave immediately. Elena fitted the earpiece, testing its secure position. What if they ask questions I can't answer? Defer to me. Say you're not authorized to discuss Mr. DeLuca's business beyond translation services. Marco's eyes were serious. These men will test you, Elena. They'll try to rattle you, seduce you, intimidate you. Stay professional. Remember that you're under my protection, which means insulting you insults me. And they won't want to insult you. Not if they're smart. Marco's smile was sharp, which Costa usually is. The restaurant was in Fiesole, high in the hills overlooking Florence, an ancient villa converted to exclusive dining, the kind of place that didn't advertise and didn't need to. They arrived exactly on time, greeted by staff who recognized Marco immediately. Mr. DeLuca, welcome back. Mr. Costa is waiting in the private room. Elena followed Marco through elegantly decorated corridors, her heart pounding despite her calm exterior. This was it. The moment where she became complicit in whatever world Marco inhabited. The private dining room was intimate. A single round table set for 6, with crystal and silver that probably cost more than Elena's annual salary as a waitress. And at the head of the table, radiating power like heat, sat Salvatore Costa. He stood as they entered, and Elena immediately understood why men feared him. Not because of his size, he was average height, trim, well-dressed, but because of his eyes. They missed nothing, calculated everything, and conveyed absolute certainty in his own authority. Marco, Costa's voice was warm but formal. Thank you for making the journey. Salvatore, it's always a pleasure. Marco moved forward, embracing the older man in the Italian style. May I introduce my translator, Elena Rossini. Elena, this is Salvatore Costa. Elena extended her hand, meeting Costa's gaze directly. An honor, Mr. Costa. His handshake was firm, assessing. Rossini, from Florence? Originally, yes. Grave in Chianti. Elena kept her voice steady. Ah, wine country. Costa's eyes sharpened. And how does a girl from Chianti end up working for an American businessman? Through excellence in her field and perfect timing, Marco interjected smoothly. Elena's linguistic skills are extraordinary. I was fortunate to find her. Costa studied Elena for another moment, then nodded. We'll see. Please sit. My associates will be here momentarily. The evening was about to begin, and Elena had just walked through a door that would never fully close behind her. The other guests arrived within minutes, each entrance carefully choreographed to display hierarchy without stating it explicitly. 2 men in their 40s entered first, introduced as Roberto and Luca, Costa's nephews, though their deference suggested they were more employees than family. A third man, older and weathered, was presented simply as Giuseppe. No title, no explanation, but the way Costa's voice softened slightly when speaking his name told Elena this was someone important. The final guest made Elena's breath catch. He was younger than the others, perhaps 35, with the kind of polished appearance that came from old money and careful cultivation. When Costa introduced him as Dante Salvetti, Elena recognized the name immediately. The Salvetti family controlled shipping routes throughout the Mediterranean, their influence stretching from legitimate maritime commerce into waters considerably murkier. Dante, this is Marco DeLuca and his translator, Elena Rossini, Costa said, watching their reactions with those calculating eyes. Dante's handshake lingered a fraction too long, his smile charming and practiced. Enchanted. It's rare to see such beauty paired with professional competence. Elena withdrew her hand smoothly. You're very kind, Mr. Salvetti. They settled around the table, the seating arrangement revealing alliances and power structures Elena cataloged automatically. Costa at the head, Marco to his right in the position of honored guest. Elena sat beside Marco, close enough to translate but positioned slightly behind, making clear she was staff, not participant. The others filled in accordingly, with Dante directly across from Elena, a placement that felt deliberate. Wine arrived first, a Brunello that probably cost more per bottle than Elena had earned in a week at the restaurant. Costa poured himself, then gestured for the others to serve themselves. No sommelier, no staff hovering. Whatever was about to be discussed required absolute privacy. To successful partnerships, Costa raised his glass, and to the trust that makes them possible. They drank, and Elena felt the weight of that toast. Trust in this room wasn't given. It was tested, earned, and could be revoked with lethal consequences. The first course arrived through a discreet service entrance, antipasti arranged with artistic precision. As they ate, the conversation remained deliberately superficial. Costa asked about Marco's flight, made observations about American politics, inquired after mutual acquaintances. Elena translated the occasional Italian phrase, noting how the men switched languages mid-sentence, testing whether she could follow the rapid transitions. She could. Years of simultaneous translation had trained her to think in multiple languages at once, to catch nuance and context that purely bilingual speakers often missed. Your translator is very skilled, Giuseppe observed in Italian, his Sicilian accent thick enough that Elena had to concentrate. Where did you find her? Marco answered in English, forcing Elena to translate. Through diligent searching, good translators are common. Exceptional ones who understand discretion are rare. And discretion is so important in our work, Dante added, his eyes on Elena. One loose word in the wrong ear can destroy years of careful planning. Elena translated without reaction, though she felt the implicit threat. They were testing her, seeing if she'd flinch or show fear. Elena understands the value of silence, Marco said calmly. She's signed agreements that make her professionally and legally bound to confidentiality. And more importantly, she's intelligent enough to know that her well-being depends on maintaining that silence. Costa smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. Threats or wisdom? Simply facts. Marco met the older man's gaze. I don't make threats against my own people, but I'm very clear about expectations and consequences. The main course arrived, ossobuco that filled the room with rich, savory aroma. As they ate, the conversation shifted. Subtle at first, but Elena recognized the transition immediately. They were moving from pleasantries to business. The situation in Genoa has become complicated, Costa said, switching to Italian. The union leadership is being unreasonable about the new shipping contracts. Elena translated automatically, her voice neutral and professional. Marco cut into his veal with precise movements. Unreasonable how? They're demanding oversight of cargo manifests, complete transparency about what moves through the port. Roberto spoke for the first time, his voice tight with frustration. It's impossible. Some shipments require privacy. Privacy or secrecy? Marco's question was mild, but Costa's nephews stiffened. There's a difference? Dante's smile was sharp. Always. Marco set down his fork. Privacy is legitimate business protecting competitive advantages. Secrecy is illegal activity hiding from scrutiny. The union knows the difference, which is why they're pressing. Costa nodded slowly. You understand the situation clearly. The question becomes how to resolve it without drawing unwanted attention. Elena translated the exchange, her mind working faster than her voice. They were discussing smuggling, almost certainly. The careful language about privacy and certain shipments was code for cargo that couldn't withstand official inspection. The union leadership can be negotiated with, Luca offered. Everyone has a price. Bribery draws more attention than compliance, Marco countered, especially if the union is already suspicious. Better to create legitimate reasons for privacy, proprietary technology, trade secrets, corporate espionage concerns. Build a legal framework that allows you to maintain control without appearing to hide illegal activity. Giuseppe leaned forward, interest sharpening his worn features. You've done this before. In similar situations, yes. American ports face identical challenges. The key is having lawyers who understand both legitimate business law and the creative interpretation thereof. Marco's slight smile suggested volumes. I can provide recommendations. The conversation continued through multiple courses, the men discussing port operations, shipping schedules, and labor negotiations in language that sounded almost legitimate. But Elena heard the subtext in every sentence, the implications behind every suggestion. They were coordinating smuggling operations across multiple countries, using shell companies and legal frameworks to mask illegal cargo movements. And she was translating every word, making herself complicit with each phrase that passed her lips. Dante had been quiet for several minutes, but his attention remained fixed on Elena. Finally, he spoke. Your translator is very composed, Marco. Most people look uncomfortable when discussions become delicate. Elena understands that business often requires delicate handling, Marco replied. She's professional enough to maintain objectivity. Is she? Dante's eyes never left Elena's face. Tell me, Miss Rossini, what do you think of our discussion so far? The room went silent. Elena felt Marco tense beside her, though his expression remained calm. This was a direct challenge, an attempt to force her to either condemn what she was hearing or reveal herself as willing participant rather than neutral translator. Elena met Dante's gaze. I think you're discussing complex logistics challenges that require creative solutions. Beyond that, my thoughts are irrelevant. I'm here to facilitate communication, not to judge business decisions. Very diplomatic. Dante's smile widened. But everyone has opinions. Surely you must think something about men who discuss moving cargo without proper documentation. I think, Elena said carefully, that international shipping is complicated, that regulations vary by jurisdiction, and that successful businessmen find ways to work within legal frameworks while protecting their interests. What those interests are isn't my concern. Costa laughed, the sound genuine and approving. She's good, Marco, very good. Manages to answer without actually saying anything. I choose my employees carefully. Marco's voice carried quiet warning. And I protect them from unnecessary harassment. The implicit rebuke made Dante lean back, though his expression showed more amusement than offense. No harassment intended, simply curiosity about a beautiful woman in a room full of dangerous men. Then consider your curiosity satisfied, Marco said flatly. Elena is my employee. That makes her untouchable by anyone at this table. Clear? The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Costa's nephews exchanged glances. Giuseppe's hand stilled on his wine glass. Even Costa himself seemed to recalibrate, recognizing that Marco had just drawn a line that couldn't be crossed without consequences. Perfectly clear, Costa said smoothly. Dante meant no disrespect. He simply appreciates competence, as do we all. He turned to Elena with calculated warmth. Please forgive any discomfort, Miss Rossini. We're not accustomed to such professional women in our meetings. Elena inclined her head. No offense taken, Mr. Costa. The tension dissipated gradually as dessert arrived, panna cotta with berry compote. The conversation shifted to safer topics, though the underlying currents remained. They discussed Marco's other business interests, mutual acquaintances in Rome and Milan, the changing political landscape in Italy. Then Costa said something that made Elena's blood freeze. I heard Antonio Greco is having difficulties. Federal investigation into misuse of public funds. The older man's tone was conversational, but his eyes watched Elena's reaction carefully. You worked in regional government translation, didn't you, Miss Rossini? You must have encountered him. Marco's hand moved slightly under the table, touching Elena's knee briefly. A reminder to stay calm, stay professional. Elena kept her voice steady. I translated for several regional officials during my time with the government. Councilman Greco was one of many. And now he's under investigation while you work for American businessmen. Dante's smile was predatory. Interesting timing. Correlation isn't causation, Elena replied coolly. I left regional government work because I wanted to travel and expand my professional experience. What Councilman Greco did after my departure has nothing to do with me. Costa studied her for a long moment. The investigation centers on irregularities during international trade negotiations, meetings that would have required translator services. This was it, the real test. They knew about Greco, knew about her history, and were pushing to see if she'd break or defend herself. Elena met Costa's eyes. If investigators are examining those meetings, they're welcome to review my translation notes. I kept meticulous records, as any professional would. My work was accurate and unbiased. If Councilman Greco used those meetings for illegal purposes, he did so despite my professional conduct, not because of it. Professional conduct. Giuseppe's rough voice held something that might have been approval. And when Greco's conduct became unprofessional toward you personally, they knew everything. Of course they did. Men like Costa didn't enter meetings without complete information. I reported it through proper channels and removed myself from the situation, Elena said quietly. I'm not a victim seeking sympathy, and I'm not interested in revenge. I simply wanted to do my job without harassment. When that became impossible, I found work elsewhere. Marco spoke before anyone else could. Elena's history with Greco is precisely why I value her discretion. She understands the cost of speaking carelessly, and she's proven willing to sacrifice her career rather than compromise her integrity. Or she's proven that she talks to investigators when things get uncomfortable, Dante suggested. No. Marco's voice was steel wrapped in silk. She proved that she documents everything and follows legal procedures, which means if she ever had information about my business, she'd have ironclad evidence and legitimate channels to report through. That's why the NDA she signed is so comprehensive. It protects both of us. She can't speak about my business without destroying herself legally, and I can't betray her trust without facing the same consequences. The logic was airtight, and Costa recognized it. He nodded slowly. Mutual assured destruction. Very American. Very practical, Marco corrected. I don't want employees who are loyal through fear alone. I want employees who understand that our interests align, that protecting me protects them, and that betrayal hurts everyone. Costa raised his wine glass. To aligned interests and mutual protection. They drank, and Elena felt something shift in the room. Not acceptance exactly, but acknowledgement. She'd passed their test, proven she could withstand pressure without breaking or fleeing. The meal concluded with grappa and espresso. The conversation turned to lighter topics, football, upcoming holidays, family news. Elena translated less frequently as the men relaxed into Italian, their guard dropping slightly. Then Costa said something that changed everything. He was speaking to Giuseppe in rapid Sicilian dialect, clearly not expecting Elena to follow. But she did. Her grandmother had been born in Sicily before moving to Tuscany as a young woman. Elena had grown up hearing the dialect during summer visits to distant relatives. Costa was talking about a shipment arriving in 3 weeks. Not cargo, people. Specifically, workers being moved from North Africa to construction sites in northern Italy. The language was careful, but the implication was clear. These weren't legal immigrants with proper documentation. They were being trafficked, brought in through private channels to work for below minimum wage without legal protection. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. She forced her expression to remain neutral, gave no sign she'd understood. But Marco had been watching her, his eyes narrowed fractionally, and she knew he'd caught her reaction. The evening wound down with final pleasantries. Costa insisted on covering the bill despite Marco's polite protests. They exchanged business cards and phone numbers, made vague plans to meet again in Rome the following week. As they stood to leave, Costa took Elena's hand in both of his. You did very well tonight, Miss Rossini. Marco is fortunate to have found you. Thank you, Mr. Costa. Elena maintained her professional smile. It was an honor to facilitate such important discussions. Important. Costa's eyes glinted. Yes, very important. I hope you understand just how important discretion is in these matters. Completely. Elena's voice was steady despite her racing heart. I understand perfectly. In the car driving back to Florence, Marco was silent for several minutes. Then he said quietly, You understood what Costa said to Giuseppe about the workers. Elena stared out the window at the dark Tuscan hillside. Yes? And? And nothing. I translated what I was asked to translate. The private conversation in Sicilian wasn't directed at me. Her voice was flat, emotionless. I heard it, but officially, I didn't understand it. Marco studied her profile. You're upset. I'm doing my job. Elena turned to face him. You told me to translate accurately and maintain discretion. That's what I'm doing. Human trafficking isn't the same as smuggling luxury goods or avoiding taxes. Marco's voice was careful. If you can't handle what you're hearing, I signed a contract. I gave my word. Elena's hands clenched in her lap. My grandmother has 3 days left, maybe less. I'm not walking away from the only chance I have to be with her because I heard something that makes me uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. Marco's laugh was humorless. Is that what you call learning that the men you just had dinner with are trafficking people? What would you call it? Elena's voice rose slightly. Should I be shocked? Horrified? Should I run to the police and report what I overheard, breaking the NDA I signed and destroying any protection I have from Greco? Should I throw away my grandmother's care and my own safety because powerful men do terrible things? The car was silent except for the hum of the engine. I know what world I've entered, Elena continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. I knew it when I signed your contract. I knew it when I walked into that restaurant. These aren't good men doing questionable things. They're dangerous men doing illegal things, and I'm helping them communicate while pretending not to see the implications. Yes, Marco said simply. That's exactly what you're doing. So don't ask me if I'm upset. Don't pretend you care about my moral discomfort. Elena's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You bought my silence and my skills. You didn't buy my soul, but you rented my complicity. Let's both be honest about what this is. Marco was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, For what it's worth, I don't like the human trafficking either. Costa knows that. It's why he spoke in Sicilian. He didn't want it translated, didn't want it acknowledged as part of our business discussion. But you do business with him anyway. Yes, because in this world you can't choose to only work with good people. There aren't any. Marco's voice was tired. There are only degrees of terrible, and you pick the devils you can tolerate while getting what you need. And what do you need from Costa? Elena asked. Access to his shipping network for entirely legal cargo, technology components, luxury goods, artwork, things that move through legitimate channels but benefit from his connections and influence. Marco met her eyes. I'm not a good man, Elena, but I have lines I don't cross. Costa knows what they are. And human trafficking is across your line. Far across it. Marco's jaw tightened. Which is why I'll make sure Costa knows I heard about that shipment, and why it will mysteriously encounter problems before it reaches Italy. Elena stared at him. You're going to sabotage it. I'm going to make a few anonymous calls to the right authorities, Coast Guard, immigration enforcement. They'll intercept the vessel, rescue the workers, and arrest the smugglers. Marco's slight smile was grim. Costa will suspect I was involved, but he won't be able to prove it, and he'll understand that's the price of doing other business with me. You could have told me that before I spent the last hour hating you. Elena's voice was shaky. You needed to understand what you've gotten into. The reality, not the sanitized version. Marco looked out at the lights of Florence appearing in the distance. This is what the next 10 days will be. Hearing terrible things, staying silent, and trusting that I'll handle what needs to be handled. Can you do that? Elena thought of her grandmother, dying in a hospital room paid for by Marco's money. Thought of the $25,000 that would let her start over. Thought of Antonio Greco still free, still dangerous, still looking for her. Yes, she said quietly. I can do that. They drove through Florence's outskirts, the city's beauty unchanged by the darkness of the conversation they'd just had. The hospital appeared ahead, its lit windows like beacons. Marco's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. Your grandmother's condition has deteriorated. The nurse called an hour ago. Elena's heart stopped. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to finish the dinner without breaking. If I'd told you earlier, you couldn't have maintained your composure. Marco's voice was matter-of-fact. She's stable now, but the doctors say you should be there. The car couldn't move fast enough. Elena was out before it fully stopped, running through the hospital entrance and up the stairs, not waiting for elevators. Julia met her outside the private suite, her expression grave. She's asking for you. Go. I'll be right here if you need anything. Elena pushed open the door to find her grandmother awake, her breathing labored but her eyes clear. Nonna. Elena took the frail hand, pressing it to her cheek. I'm here. I'm sorry I was gone so long. Shh, Bambina. You're here now. Lucia's voice was barely audible. Tell me about your dinner. Did the dangerous man's business go well? Even now, even dying, her grandmother wanted to know she was safe. Elena swallowed tears. Yes, it went well. Everything is fine. You're lying. Lucia's slight smile was knowing. But you're here and you're safe. That's what matters. They sat in silence for a while, hands clasped, sharing the same air. Outside, Marco waited in the hallway with Julia, giving them privacy. Promise me something, Lucia said finally. Promise me you'll be smart, that you won't let these men make you into something you're not. I promise, Nonna. And promise me you'll live, really live. Not just survive, not just hide, live. Lucia's grip tightened with surprising strength. You're so young, Kara. You have so much life ahead. Don't waste it being afraid. I won't. Elena's tears fell freely now. I promise. Good. Lucia's eyes drifted closed. That's good. Now let me sleep. I'm very tired. Elena sat with her grandmother through the night, watching her breathe, memorizing the lines of her face, the shape of her hands, the sound of her voice in memory. Marco brought coffee at midnight, setting it beside Elena without comment. He didn't ask if she needed anything, didn't offer empty comfort. He simply ensured she had what she required and left her alone. At 3 a.m., Lucia woke briefly. Elena? I'm here. I love you, Bambina. Always remember that. Whatever choices you make, whatever life you build, I love you. I love you too, Nonna, so much. Lucia smiled, squeezed Elena's hand, and closed her eyes. She didn't open them again. Elena felt the moment her grandmother left, felt the change in the room, the absence where presence had been. She sat frozen, still holding the cooling hand, unable to process that the woman who'd raised her, protected her, loved her unconditionally, was gone. Julia came in quietly, checking for a pulse she knew wouldn't be there. I'm so sorry, Kara. She went peacefully. Elena nodded, unable to speak. Marco appeared in the doorway. He didn't approach, didn't intrude on her grief. But his presence was solid and real in a world that had just become impossibly empty. Elena's voice broke. I need a few minutes. Take as long as you need. Marco's voice was gentle. I'll handle the arrangements. You just be with her. Elena stayed with her grandmother until dawn, talking to her in whispers, telling her about the stars visible through the window, about memories from childhood, about dreams for a future Lucia would never see. When the sun rose over Florence, painting the Tuscan sky in gold and rose, Elena finally stood. She kissed her grandmother's forehead one last time and walked out of the room into the hallway where Marco waited. I'm ready, she said quietly. Marco nodded. The funeral home will arrive this afternoon. I've arranged for burial in the family plot in Greve. The service will be day after tomorrow, if that's acceptable. That's fine. Elena's voice was hollow, distant. Thank you. You don't need to thank me, Marco gestured toward the elevator. Come on, I'm taking you to the hotel. You need to sleep. I need to... Elena stopped, realizing she had no idea what she needed. Everything felt surreal, disconnected. You need to sleep, Marco repeated firmly. Then you need to eat. Then we'll talk about the next few days, but right now you need rest. The hotel was elegant and quiet, overlooking the Arno River. Marco had reserved a suite, spacious and comfortable. He showed Elena the bedroom, bathroom, the sitting area with its view of the Ponte Vecchio. Sleep as long as you want. I'm in the suite next door if you need anything. Marco paused at the door. Elena, I'm sorry. I know that's inadequate, but I am sorry. Elena nodded, too numb for words. After he left, she stood at the window watching the river flow past, eternal and indifferent. Her grandmother was dead. She'd made it in time, had those precious hours, but now Lucia was gone, and Elena was alone in a city she'd fled, working for a man she barely trusted, complicit in crimes she couldn't speak of. She thought about the human trafficking shipment Costa had discussed, thought about Marco's promise to sabotage it, wondered if that was true or simply something he'd said to make her feel better about her complicity. The weight of it all, the grief, the moral compromise, the danger she'd entered, crashed over her in waves. Elena sank onto the bed and finally let herself break completely. She cried for her grandmother, for her parents buried 2 decades ago, for the career she'd lost to Greco's obsession, for the innocence she'd traded away when she signed Marco's contract. And when the tears finally stopped, she slept, dreamless and exhausted. When Elena woke, the sun was setting again. She'd slept for 12 hours straight, her body demanding rest her mind couldn't provide. The suite was dim, peaceful. Someone, probably Marco, had left food on the sitting room table. Sandwiches, fruit, bottled water. Elena ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Then she showered, standing under the hot water until it ran cold, trying to wash away the feeling of being irrevocably changed. Her phone showed missed calls from Julia and a text from Marco. Funeral arrangements confirmed, service at 10 a.m. day after tomorrow. Take tonight to rest. We'll talk in the morning. Elena dressed in comfortable clothes and sat by the window, watching Florence come alive with evening lights. Somewhere in this city, Greco was probably still free, still powerful. Somewhere, Costa was planning his next illegal venture. And somewhere, Marco was navigating the space between them all, pulling strings she couldn't see. Her grandmother's voice echoed in memory. Don't let these men make you into something you're not. But who was she now? The question hung in the air, unanswered and terrifying. A knock at the door made her turn. Marco stood in the hallway, still dressed in his clothes from the day before, looking as tired as she felt. I thought you might want company, he said quietly. Or I can leave. Elena considered, then stepped aside. Come in. He entered, moving to the sitting area but not sitting, giving her space to decide what she needed. Thank you, Elena said finally. For everything. The hospital, the funeral arrangements, the time with my grandmother. I know I'm just an employee, but You're not just an employee. Marco's interruption was gentle but firm. You're someone who deserved a chance to say goodbye. That's all. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the past 24 hours filling the space between them. The shipment, Elena said finally. The one Costa mentioned. Did you really call the authorities? Marco met her eyes. Yes. Coast Guard received an anonymous tip 3 hours ago. They'll intercept the vessel tomorrow night. And Costa will know you were involved. He'll suspect. But he'll also understand the message. I'll facilitate his legitimate business, but I won't enable his worst impulses. Marco's expression was unreadable. It's a line I draw, even if it costs me. Elena nodded slowly. Tomorrow is the funeral. What happens after? We have 3 more meetings scheduled. Rome, then Milan, then back to Florence. All legitimate business, mostly. Technology contracts, investment opportunities. Marco paused. But there will be more moments like last night. More things you'll hear that you can't unhear. After the funeral, if you want out, I'll honor that. You'll still get paid, your grandmother's expenses are covered. You can walk away. It was a real choice, genuinely offered. Elena recognized that. And if I stay? She asked. Then we finish the 10 days. You translate, maintain discretion, and we both go back to New York with this chapter closed. Marco's voice was steady. But you'll carry what you've heard, what you've seen. That doesn't go away. Elena thought about it, about the money that would let her start over, about the completion of a contract she'd signed, about proving to herself that she could survive in this world without losing herself completely. I'll stay, she said quietly. I'll finish the 10 days. Marco nodded, unsurprised. Then rest tonight. Tomorrow we bury your grandmother, and the day after, we go back to work. He left her alone again, and Elena returned to the window, watching the city lights reflect off the Arno. Part 4. Lưu ý mà viết 60.600 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ. Phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kẻ theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ độ kịch tính không viết lan man, Kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document 13 Nambi Tun. She woke before dawn to prepare for the funeral, her body moving through rituals of grief it remembered from burying her parents 2 decades ago. Black dress, simple jewelry, hair pulled back in a severe knot. In the mirror, Elena saw a woman who looked older than 28, marked by loss and compromise in equal measure. Marco met her in the hotel lobby, also dressed in black, his expression somber and respectful. He didn't ask how she'd slept or offer meaningless comfort. He simply nodded and opened the car door, understanding that some moments required silence. The drive to grieve in Chianti took an hour through morning mist that clung to the hillsides like ghosts. Elena watched the landscape of her childhood pass by. Vineyards she'd played in as a girl, the church where she'd been baptized, the small house where her grandmother had raised her. Everything achingly familiar and impossibly distant. The funeral was small. Julia came, and a few of Lucia's neighbors from her final years in Florence. A cousin Elena barely remembered made the journey from Sicily. Marco stood at the back of the church, respectful but separate, understanding he didn't belong in this circle of genuine mourning. The priest spoke of Lucia's faith, her strength, her devotion to family. Elena heard the words without processing them, focused instead on the simple wooden casket that held all that remained of the woman who'd been her anchor. At the graveside, Elena placed a single white rose on the casket as it was lowered into Tuscan soil beside her parents. 3 generations of Rossini, reunited in death while Elena stood alone among the living. She was proud of you, Julia whispered, embracing Elena tightly. She told me so every day. Whatever you're doing, wherever life takes you, remember that. She was so proud. Elena nodded against the nurse's shoulder, unable to speak around the grief choking her throat. The gathering afterward was brief. Coffee and pastries in the church hall, quiet conversations about Lucia's life, condolences offered with genuine warmth. Marco waited by the car, giving Elena space but remaining visible, a silent reminder that this interlude was temporary. The real world waited beyond the cemetery gates. When the last mourner departed, Elena stood alone in the empty hall, surrounded by the detritus of grief. Half-empty coffee cups, crumpled napkins, a guest book no one would ever read again. Marco appeared in the doorway. Ready? No. Elena's voice was raw. But I don't think that matters. The drive back to Florence felt like crossing between worlds. Behind her lay childhood, family, the person she'd been before everything fell apart. Ahead lay the choices she'd made, the contracts she'd signed, the compromises she couldn't undo. We have a meeting tonight in Rome, Marco said quietly. Different from the dinner with Costa. This one is primarily legitimate business, technology investments, import-export contracts. But the man we're meeting, Vittorio Benedetti, has connections that make him useful. Elena stared out the window. What kind of connections? Political, primarily. He has influence with ministers, regulators, people who make decisions about permits and approvals. Marco's tone was carefully neutral. Our discussion will be entirely legal, but understanding who he knows and what leverage he holds is part of the value. And you want me to translate what's said and what's implied? Yes. Benedetti is subtle. He never states things directly, but his meaning is always clear to those who know how to listen. Marco glanced at her. Can you do this tonight? If you need more time. I don't have more time. I have 8 days left on the contract. Elena's voice was flat. Let's finish this. They arrived in Rome by early evening, the city golden in the slanting light. Marco had reserved rooms at a hotel near the Spanish Steps, elegant and discreet. Elena changed into a charcoal dress, appropriate for business, armor against whatever the night would bring. The meeting location was a private club, the kind of establishment that didn't advertise and didn't admit anyone without impeccable references. Marco was clearly known here. The doorman greeted him by name. The staff moved with practiced efficiency to show them to a private salon. Vittorio Benedetti was already waiting, a silver-haired man in his late 50s with the bearing of old Roman aristocracy. He rose as they entered, his smile warm but his eyes calculating every detail of their appearance. Marco, my friend, too long since we've met face to face. His handshake was firm, his attention immediately shifting to Elena. And you've brought a colleague. My translator, Elena Rossini. Elena, this is Vittorio Benedetti. Marco's introduction was smooth, professional. A pleasure. Benedetti took Elena's hand, raising it briefly toward his lips in an old-fashioned gesture. Rossini. Any relation to the composer? Distant, perhaps, but I make no claims to artistic genius. Elena's smile was practiced, empty. I simply help conversations flow across languages. Modest and beautiful. Marco, you have excellent taste in employees. Benedetti gestured to comfortable chairs arranged around a low table. Please, sit. I've ordered wine, a Barolo that should please even your discriminating palate. The wine arrived with appetizers, olives, cheeses, delicate pastries. They made small talk while eating, Benedetti asking about Marco's flight, commenting on American politics, sharing gossip about mutual acquaintances. Elena translated the occasional Italian phrase, noting how Benedetti watched her reactions, testing whether she understood the subtext beneath his pleasant words. I hear you had dinner with Salvatore Costa, Benedetti said eventually, his tone conversational. How is the old lion? Strong as ever. He sends his regards. Marco sipped his wine. We discussed shipping logistics primarily. His network remains impressive. Indeed, though I hear there was some unfortunate news about one of his shipments. Coast Guard intervention. Very inconvenient. Benedetti's eyes glinted. Random bad luck, I'm sure. Fortune can be unpredictable. Marco's expression revealed nothing, especially when ventures attract unwanted scrutiny. Elena translated the exchange, hearing the real conversation beneath the polite words. Benedetti knew Marco had sabotaged Costa's human trafficking operation. This was acknowledgement, perhaps even approval disguised as observation. Quite right. Which brings me to why I wanted to meet. Benedetti set down his wine glass. I have an opportunity that might interest you. Technology sector, specifically software development for government applications. The Italian Ministry of Infrastructure is modernizing their systems, roads, bridges, public transportation. Very lucrative contracts for companies that can provide secure, efficient solutions. And you have influence over contract awards. Marco's statement wasn't a question. I have friends who value my advice. When I recommend a qualified company, they listen. Benedetti smiled. Of course, the company must actually be qualified. I don't risk my reputation on incompetence. I work with several American tech firms that specialize in infrastructure software. All legitimate, all proven track records. Marco pulled out his phone, showing Benedetti something on the screen. This one in particular has developed systems for 3 major U.S. cities. Excellent security, user-friendly interfaces, comprehensive support. Benedetti studied the information, nodding slowly. Impressive. I would need complete documentation, capabilities, references, security certifications. The ministry is very particular about data protection. Understandably. I can provide everything required. Marco paused. What would you need in exchange for making this recommendation? The question hung in the air, direct despite its careful phrasing. Elena translated, though both men clearly understood each other perfectly. A partnership arrangement. If the contract is awarded, I would expect a consulting fee, let's say 15% of the first year's revenue, plus ongoing advisory retainer. Benedetti's smile was pleasant, his terms absolutely firm. I provide access and advocacy. You provide legitimate value. Everyone benefits. 15% is substantial. Marco's voice was mild. So is a €100 million government contract. While Benedetti leaned back. Without my introduction, your company doesn't even get past the initial screening. With it, they're shortlisted immediately. That access has value. Elena watched Marco calculate, weighing the corruption inherent in paying for political influence against the business opportunity. This was different from Costa's illegal smuggling. This lived in the gray area where legitimate business met political favor trading. 10%, Marco countered, plus the advisory retainer. But I need assurance the recommendation carries real weight, not just an introduction that goes nowhere. My recommendations carry absolute weight. Benedetti's voice hardened slightly. I don't waste time on ventures that won't succeed. If I bring your company to the ministry, they win the contract. Guaranteed. How can you guarantee a government procurement process? Elena asked before she could stop herself. Both men looked at her, surprised. Marco's expression showed warning, but Benedetti seemed intrigued. An excellent question, Miss Rossini. He addressed her directly, switching to Italian. The truth is, I can't guarantee the formal process, but I can ensure that the evaluation committee consists of people who understand which companies are truly qualified, and I can make certain that disqualifying factors somehow don't apply to recommended firms. Elena translated his words back to English automatically, though Marco had clearly understood the Italian. You control the committee composition, Marco said. I advise the minister who appoints the committee. There's a difference. Benedetti's smile was sharp. Everything I do is entirely legal. I simply help qualified companies navigate a complex bureaucratic system. It was corruption wrapped in legality, influence peddling disguised as consultation. Elena felt the familiar weight of complicity settling deeper. 12%, Marco said. That's my final offer. And I need written confirmation that the recommended company meets all legitimate requirements. If they win purely on merit, I have no concerns. But if they win because the process was manipulated, that's exposure I won't accept. Benedetti considered this, swirling his wine thoughtfully. 12% plus the retainer, plus one additional consideration. Which is? Your translator. Benedetti's eyes shifted to Elena. I host a gathering next month in Venice. Politicians, business leaders, European investors. Very exclusive, very influential. I need someone who can facilitate conversations between Italian, English, and French speakers. Someone discreet, professional, and presentable. Elena's stomach tightened. Marco's expression remained neutral, but she sensed tension in his stillness. Elena's contract with me ends in a week, Marco said carefully. After that, her employment decisions are her own. Of course, I'm not suggesting anything inappropriate, Benedetti addressed Elena directly. I would pay very well for 3 days of professional translation services, 50,000 euros, all expenses covered, luxury accommodation, and introductions to people who could provide ongoing work if you're interested. It was a staggering sum for 3 days of work. It was also clearly a test of Elena's availability and Marco's control over her. That's very generous, Elena said carefully, but I'll need to consider my schedule and commitments before accepting. Naturally, Marco has my contact information. Reach out when you've decided. Benedetti's smile suggested he expected acceptance. Now, shall we discuss the technology contract specifics? The conversation shifted to technical details, software capabilities, security protocols, implementation timelines. Elena translated competently, her mind working through the implications of Benedetti's offer. 50,000 euros for 3 days of work. Enough money to disappear completely, to start over anywhere in the world. But also an offer from a man who traded in political influence, who clearly operated in the same shadowy spaces as Costa and Marco. Accepting would mean deeper entanglement in this world, more compromises, more silence about things that shouldn't be silent. The meeting concluded with handshakes and promises to finalize agreements in writing. Benedetti kissed Elena's hand again, his grip lingering. I hope you'll consider Venice, Miss Rossini. Your skills are wasted on temporary translation work. In the car back to the hotel, Marco was silent for several blocks. Finally, he said, You're not obligated to accept Benedetti's offer. I know. Elena stared out at Rome's nighttime streets. But it's good money. It's a trap. Marco's voice was flat. Benedetti doesn't make generous offers without strings attached. If you go to Venice, you'll meet people who will want to use you. Your skills, your access to me, your willingness to stay silent. Once you're in that circle, extraction becomes difficult. And working for you is different how? The question hung between them, sharp and uncomfortable. It's not, Marco admitted. Except that my contract has a defined end date. Benedetti's world doesn't work that way. You become useful, you become permanent, and if you try to leave, you know too much. Elena processed this. He's testing whether I'm available for recruitment. Yes. And whether I'll block it. Marco's expression was grim. If I forbid you from taking the job, I look controlling, and he knows you're not truly independent. If I encourage it, he knows I'm willing to share resources. Either way, he learns something valuable. What if I simply decline on my own terms? Say I'm pursuing other opportunities. Then you maintain agency while keeping both options open. Marco glanced at her, which is probably the smartest play. Don't burn bridges, but don't commit to crossing them either. The hotel appeared ahead, its warm lights a contrast to the cold calculations they'd been discussing. Marco pulled into the entrance, putting the car in park but not moving to get out. Elena, I need you to understand something. His voice was serious, commanding her full attention. The deeper you go into this world, the harder it becomes to leave. You've already heard things that make you valuable to multiple players. That value is both protection and prison. I know. Elena's voice was steady. I understood that when I signed your contract. Did you? Because knowing intellectually and feeling it practically are different things. Marco turned to face her fully. You've buried your grandmother, fulfilled the primary reason you took this job. If you want out now, I'll honor the full contract payment. You can disappear again, start clean somewhere else. It was the second time he'd offered her an exit. Elena studied his face, trying to read his motives. Why do you keep trying to convince me to leave? Because I don't want you to end up like me. The admission came out quietly, almost reluctant. I chose this life deliberately, understanding all the costs. You fell into it because you were desperate, and I exploited that desperation. There's a difference. Elena sat with that for a moment, surprised by his honesty. And if I stay, finish the contract, keep working in this world, then you choose it with full knowledge. That makes it different. Not better, necessarily, but honest. Marco's eyes held hers. Just make sure you're choosing, not just surviving. She thought about her grandmother's last words. Don't let these men make you into something you're not. But who was she? A woman who'd run from Greco's harassment, who'd signed away her voice for money, who'd translated conversations about human trafficking while staying silent, or someone capable of surviving in dangerous spaces without losing herself completely. I'll finish the contract, Elena said finally. All 10 days, then I'll decide what comes next. Marco nodded, accepting her choice. Then we have 6 days left. 2 more meetings, Milan tomorrow, then back to Florence the day after. After that, we return to New York. They entered the hotel separately, maintaining professional distance. In her room, Elena stood at the window overlooking Rome, the city where Caesars once ruled and corruption had been an art form for millennia. Nothing had really changed, she thought, just the names and methods. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, the message in Italian. Miss Rossini, I hope you enjoyed our meeting. The Venice opportunity remains open. Sometimes the best futures are the ones we don't initially plan. VB. Benedetti, making sure she had his direct contact, making sure she knew the door was open. Elena deleted the message but didn't block the number. Marco was right. Burning bridges was foolish, but crossing them required care. The next morning brought rain, turning Milan gray and somber as they drove to the meeting location. This one was in a corporate office building, legitimate on the surface. The company, Rossetti Industries, manufactured precision components for automotive and aerospace applications. Their CEO, Franco Rossetti, was a third-generation industrialist with political connections and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. This meeting is different from the others, Marco explained during the drive. Rossetti is entirely legitimate in his business operations, but he's facing labor union problems similar to Costa's shipping issues. I'm consulting on how to resolve them without triggering strikes or government intervention. Union busting. Elena's voice was neutral. Labor relations strategy, Marco corrected. There's a legal way to negotiate with unions that protects both company interests and worker rights. That's what we're discussing. The meeting room was all glass and steel, modern and impersonal. Rossetti was younger than Elena expected, perhaps 45, with the intensity of someone who'd inherited an empire and was determined to expand it. 2 vice presidents flanked him, both stone-faced and silent. The discussion started with technical details, production schedules, profit margins, labor costs. Elena translated competently, noting how Rossetti's eyes kept flicking to her, assessing, calculating. The union is demanding a 15% wage increase, Rossetti said, frustration evident. It's unsustainable. Our margins are already tight due to raw material costs. What's the union's real concern? Marco asked. Wage increases are usually proxies for something else. Job security, working conditions, pension stability. Rossetti paused, considering. They're worried about automation. We've been implementing new manufacturing systems that require fewer workers. So the wage demand is actually a job security issue. Marco leaned forward. You can't stop automation. You'd become uncompetitive. But you can manage the transition in ways that reduce workforce anxiety. How? Retraining programs move displaced workers into new positions rather than layoffs. Partner with the union to design the transition rather than imposing it. Marco's voice was practical, consultative. Frame automation as evolution, not replacement. Workers who feel invested in the company's future don't strike. One of the VPs spoke for the first time. That's expensive. Training costs, maintaining headcount during transition periods. Cheaper than strikes that shut down production for weeks. Cheaper than the reputation damage from mass layoffs. Marco pulled out a tablet, showing data. I consulted for a similar company in Detroit. They implemented this approach. Full transition took 3 years, but they never lost a single day to strikes. Union became their partner instead of their adversary. Rossetti studied the information, his expression shifting from skeptical to interested. The union leadership would agree to this? If you approach them as partners, yes, but it requires giving them real input, not just cosmetic consultation. Marco's voice was firm. You can't fake collaboration. They'll see through it immediately. The conversation continued for over an hour, Marco outlining specific strategies, Rossetti asking increasingly detailed questions. Elena translated everything, impressed despite herself by Marco's legitimate business acumen. This wasn't corruption or illegal scheming. This was actual value creation, solving real problems. As the meeting concluded, Rossetti shook Marco's hand warmly. You've given me a lot to think about. I'd like to bring you in formally as a consultant. I can provide references and a fee structure. Marco handed over a business card. Though I should mention, if you decide to proceed, you'll need to actually follow through on the worker partnership approach. Half measures will backfire spectacularly. Understood. Rossetti turned to Elena. Your translator is excellent, by the way. Very precise. Very professional. Thank you. Elena inclined her head. If you're ever looking for work in Milan, I could use someone with your skills. We have increasing international business that requires translation services. Rossetti's offer seemed genuine, professional. I appreciate that. I'll keep it in mind. Elena maintained her polite smile. In the car afterward, Marco seemed satisfied. That went well. Rossetti's smart enough to see the value in my approach. That was actually helpful advice, Elena observed. Not manipulation, not corruption, just good consulting. Most of my business is legitimate, Marco said. The illegal parts are edge cases, not the core. I work with people like Costa because their networks provide access, but my actual value is strategic thinking and problem solving. Then why work with people like Costa at all? Elena asked. If you're legitimately skilled, why risk association with criminals? Marco was silent for a long moment. Because the legitimate world has gatekeepers, connections, relationships, insider status. People like Costa control access to opportunities that would take decades to build otherwise. I use their networks to accelerate my business, and I manage the ethical compromises as best I can. By sabotaging human trafficking shipments. By drawing lines I won't cross and enforcing them consistently. Marco's voice was firm. It's not perfect, but it's honest in its way. Elena wondered if that was enough. If clear-eyed participation in a corrupt system was meaningfully different from naive complicity. She suspected the answer was complicated, situational, impossible to define absolutely. They returned to Florence that evening. The city felt different now, touched by grief and knowledge Elena couldn't shake. Her grandmother was buried in Tuscan soil. Elena had translated conversations about trafficking and corruption. She'd been offered 50,000 euros to entangle herself deeper in Benedetti's world. The hotel room felt like a cage, however luxurious. Elena changed into comfortable clothes and stood at the window, watching the Arno flow past in the darkness. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Marco stood in the hallway, holding 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. "Thought you might want company," he said. "Or I can leave the wine and go." Elena stepped aside, letting him enter. He poured wine for both of them, settling into one of the chairs without presumption. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "I honestly don't know." Elena sipped the wine, tasting nothing. "My grandmother is dead. I'm working for a man who operates in shadows. I've been offered multiple jobs that would pull me deeper into a world I'm not sure I want to be part of, and I can't talk about any of it because I signed an NDA that binds me to silence forever." That about sums it up, yes. Marco's slight smile was sympathetic. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing this life?" Elena asked. Marco considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. Usually late at night when I can't sleep, thinking about the compromises I've made. The people I've done business with despite knowing what they are." He paused. "But I also know this world gave me opportunities I'd never have had otherwise. Poor kid from Brooklyn doesn't typically build a multi-million-dollar consulting business. I took shortcuts, made deals with devils, and got here faster than the legitimate path would have allowed. And the cost was worth it? I don't know yet. Ask me in 20 years if I'm still alive and free." Marco's voice was honest, unflinching. "What I do know is that I made my choices deliberately. I can live with that, even when I don't like it." Elena absorbed this, wondering if she'd have the same clarity about her own choices eventually. "The contract ends in 5 days," Marco continued. "After that, you have decisions to make. Benedetti's offer, Rossetti's offer, or something else entirely. You could take your 25,000 and disappear, start over somewhere nobody knows your name." "Could I? Really?" Elena met his eyes. "You found me once when I was trying to disappear. How do I know others couldn't do the same?" "Because I'll make sure they can't." Marco's voice was firm. "Part of our agreement, part of protecting my investment. If you want to vanish after this, I'll help you do it properly. New identity, financial structure that can't be traced, location that won't be compromised. Why would you do that? Because you earned it. You've done exactly what I asked, maintained discretion under pressure, and proven yourself valuable. I protect valuable people." Marco set down his wine glass. "Plus, frankly, I don't want you ending up working for Benedetti. He's more dangerous than me in ways that matter." Elena laughed, the sound bitter. "That's a low bar." "True, but it's honest." Marco stood, moving toward the door. "Think about what you want, Elena. Not what you need to survive, but what you actually want. There's a difference." After he left, Elena sat alone with the question. What did she want? Not to be invisible anymore, constantly afraid. Not to be owned or controlled by men who thought power gave them rights over her. Not to spend her life running from one hiding place to another. But what did that leave? A legitimate career seemed impossible now. She knew too much, was too compromised. Working in the shadow world meant constant moral calculus, weighing lesser evils against greater opportunities. Her grandmother's voice echoed again. "Live. Really live. Don't just survive." Elena pulled out her laptop, opening a secure browser. She researched Benedetti more thoroughly, finding exactly what she expected. Connections to politicians, businesses both legal and questionable, a network that extended across Europe. Working for him would mean access, money, influence. It would also mean permanent entanglement and corruption she'd never escape. She researched Rossetti Industries, finding a legitimately successful manufacturing company. Working there would be honest employment, good money, respectable. But it would also mean staying in Italy, risking eventual exposure to Greco's network, never fully escaping her past. Or she could take Marco's offer, disappear properly, start completely over. New name, new country, new life. Safe but solitary, protected but alone. None of the options felt right. But perhaps that was the point. Perfect choices didn't exist, only imperfect ones made with full knowledge of their costs. Elena closed the laptop and went to bed, knowing the next 5 days would force her to decide which imperfect future she could live with. The morning brought news that changed everything. Elena woke to her phone ringing insistently, an Italian number she didn't recognize. She answered groggily, expecting another condolence call about her grandmother. Miss Rossini, this is Inspector Carla Benetti, Florence Financial Crimes Unit. I need to speak with you about Antonio Greco. Elena sat upright, suddenly completely awake. What about him? He was arrested this morning. Federal corruption charges, embezzlement, abuse of office. The investigation you contributed to has concluded. The inspector's voice was professionally neutral. We need you to come in for a formal statement. Your documentation was crucial to building the case. Elena's hands shook as she processed this. He's actually arrested? Not just under investigation? In custody as of 6 a.m., bail was denied due to flight risk and evidence tampering concerns. A pause. Miss Rossini, you're safe now. He can't reach you anymore. After hanging up, Elena sat frozen, unable to fully comprehend what she'd just heard. 2 years of running, hiding, being afraid to use her real name or return to her home country. And now suddenly, it was over. Greco was in custody. She was free. A knock at her door made her jump. Marco stood in the hallway, already dressed for the day, his expression unreadable. You heard, Elena said. I have contacts in law enforcement. They notified me an hour ago. Marco entered at her gesture. The charges are substantial. If convicted, he's looking at 15 to 20 years. How did they finally get him? The investigation has been stalled for months. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, still processing. Marco was quiet for a moment. Someone provided additional evidence. Financial records, recorded conversations, documentation of bribes and kickbacks that went beyond what you'd originally given investigators. Something in his tone made Elena look at him sharply. Someone. You? I have resources. After learning about your situation, I had people look into Greco's activities more thoroughly. Marco's voice was matter-of-fact. What they found was passed anonymously to the appropriate authorities. The evidence spoke for itself. Elena stared at him. You took down Greco. For me. I removed a threat to someone I employ. There's a difference. But his eyes told a different story. Why? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. You already had me under contract. I couldn't run. Why bother? Marco moved to the window, looking out at Florence awakening below. Because you reminded me that there are lines worth defending. Costa's trafficking shipment, Greco's harassment and corruption. Some things shouldn't be tolerated, even in this world. He turned to face her. You did nothing wrong. You reported corruption and protected yourself. Greco should have faced consequences years ago. I just helped speed up justice. Elena felt something shift inside her, a weight she'd carried for 2 years suddenly lighter. The inspector wants me to give a formal statement. Then we'll go together. Make sure they handle this properly. Marco's tone was firm. You're still under my protection until the contract ends. That includes protection from legal complications. The Florence Financial Crimes Unit occupied a modern building near the Palazzo Vecchio. Inspector Benetti was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who greeted Elena with professional warmth and led them to a private interview room. Marco stayed present throughout, his lawyer on speakerphone to ensure Elena's rights were protected. The statement took 3 hours. Elena walked through her history with Greco, the harassment, the documentation she'd collected, the decision to flee rather than continue fighting. Inspector Benetti listened carefully, taking detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Your original documentation was excellent, the inspector said. Very thorough, very precise. It gave us the foundation to investigate further. The additional evidence we received recently confirmed patterns and provided the financial proof we needed. She didn't mention Marco's involvement, and Elena didn't volunteer it. Will I need to testify? Elena asked. Possibly, if the case goes to trial, but with the evidence we have, Greco's attorneys are already discussing plea bargains. Benetti closed her notebook. Miss Rossini, you should know that several other women have come forward since the arrest. You weren't his only victim. Your courage in documenting and reporting gave them permission to speak up. Elena absorbed this, feeling sorrow for the other women, and satisfaction that Greco would finally face consequences. What happens now? You're free to go. We'll contact you if we need additional information or if trial testimony becomes necessary. Benetti stood, offering her hand. Thank you for your cooperation, and welcome home to Italy, if you're planning to stay. Outside, the Florentine sun felt warmer than it had in years. Elena stood on the courthouse steps, breathing deeply, feeling lighter than she could remember. Greco is finished, Marco said quietly. Even if he somehow avoids maximum prison time, his political career is destroyed, his reputation is ruined, he'll never have power over anyone again. Because of you. Elena looked at him directly. You could have just let the existing investigation play out. Instead, you actively intervened. I had the resources. You deserve justice. Marco's expression was unreadable. Don't make it more complicated than it is. But it was more complicated, and they both knew it. This man who operated in shadows, who did business with criminals, who traded in moral compromises, he'd used his power to protect her, to deliver justice, to free her from fear. Thank you, Elena said quietly. I know those words are inadequate, but thank you. Marco nodded, accepting without deflecting. Come on, we have one final meeting tonight. Then this is finished. The last meeting was back at the villa in Fiesole, where they'd first met with Costa. But this time, it was just Costa himself, no associates or audience. The private dining room felt different with only 3 people, intimate rather than intimidating. Costa greeted them warmly, though his eyes held calculation when they settled on Elena. Miss Rossini, I hear congratulations are in order. Antonio Greco's arrest must be very satisfying for you. Elena kept her expression neutral. Justice is satisfying, yes. Indeed. And justice comes in many forms. Costa gestured to the table. Please sit. I've arranged a simple meal. We have business to conclude. Over antipasti and wine, Costa and Marco discussed the technology contract they'd outlined at the first meeting. Details were finalized, terms agreed upon, money and influence exchanged through carefully legal channels. Elena translated when needed, mostly staying silent as the 2 men negotiated. Then Costa shifted topics. The shipment we discussed last week encountered problems. Coast Guard intervention, very unfortunate. Marco met his eyes steadily. Unfortunate, but perhaps not surprising. High-risk ventures often face complications, especially when someone provides authorities with specific information about timing and routes. Costa's voice was mild, conversational. Someone with excellent intelligence and strong moral objections to certain types of cargo. Elena's breath caught, but Marco remained calm. If someone did that, they'd be drawing a line, making clear what business they will and won't facilitate. Yes, that's exactly what they'd be doing. Costa sipped his wine thoughtfully. The question becomes whether such moral positioning is compatible with ongoing business relationships. The threat was delicate but present. Elena felt her hand tighten on her wine glass. I think, Marco said carefully, that clear boundaries make better partnerships. You know exactly what I will and won't support. That eliminates uncertainty and prevents future conflicts. Or it eliminates the partnership entirely. Costa's eyes were sharp. That's your choice to make. Marco's voice was steady. I offer value in legitimate ventures. I won't participate in or ignore human trafficking. Those terms are non-negotiable. The silence stretched, tension filling the elegant room. Elena barely breathed, watching 2 powerful men engage in a battle of wills disguised as polite conversation. Finally, Costa laughed. You have steel in you, Marco. I appreciate that. Too many people in our world say yes to everything, then become liabilities when their conscience catches up. And your decision? Marco asked. We continue our legitimate business. The technology contracts, the shipping arrangements for legal cargo, the investment opportunities. Everything that creates value without creating moral complexity. Costa raised his glass. And we agree that certain ventures are incompatible with our partnership. I have other associates for those activities. Marco raised his own glass, relief flickering across his expression, to clear boundaries and profitable partnerships. They drank, and Elena understood she'd just witnessed something rare. A criminal holding another criminal accountable, lines drawn within a world that supposedly had none. The dinner concluded with espresso and genuine warmth. Costa even asked Elena about her plans, offering his own version of a job opportunity, translation services for his entirely legitimate business operations, excellent pay, no complications. Thank you, but I'm still considering my options, Elena said diplomatically. Smart woman. Don't commit to anything until you're certain. Costa stood, shaking Marco's hand firmly. Safe travels back to New York. And Miss Rossini, if you ever need anything in Italy, you have my number. I pay my debts, and you helped facilitate very profitable arrangements. In the car driving back to Florence, Elena finally allowed herself to relax. That could have gone very differently. Yes, Costa could have decided I was too much trouble and ended our relationship. Or worse. Marco's voice was matter-of-fact about the implied threat. But he's a businessman first. As long as I provide value and maintain clear boundaries, we can work together. You risked everything to stop that trafficking shipment. I risked a business relationship to stop human beings from being sold like cargo. Marco's jaw tightened. There are some prices I won't pay, even for profit. Elena studied his profile in the dim light. You're not what I expected when we first met. What did you expect? A monster, honestly. Someone who'd use me and discard me without thought. She paused. Instead, you're someone who operates in a terrible world while trying to maintain some version of ethics. It's confusing. It's the best I can do. Marco's voice was quiet. I'm not a good man, Elena, but I'm trying not to be a completely terrible one. Some days that's the only victory available. They drove in silence for a while, the Tuscan countryside dark around them. Florence appeared ahead, its lights reflecting off the Arno like scattered stars. Tomorrow, we fly back to New York, Marco said. The contract officially ends when we land. You'll receive your full payment within 24 hours, $25,000 transferred to the account of your choice. And then? Elena asked. And then you decide what comes next. Benedetti's offer is still open. Rossetti's offer stands, or you take the money and disappear properly. Marco glanced at her. What are you thinking? Elena had been thinking about this for days, weighing options against values, freedom against security, truth against survival. I don't want to disappear anymore. I'm tired of hiding, tired of being afraid. Greco's arrest means I can actually live in Italy again if I choose. But I also don't want to go deeper into Benedetti's world. 50,000 euros isn't worth becoming permanently entangled in that level of corruption. She took a breath. And Rossetti's offer, while legitimate, feels like settling for safety instead of choosing what I actually want. Which is, Marco's voice was carefully neutral. I don't know yet. Maybe that's okay. Elena looked out at the passing lights. For 2 years, I've made decisions based on fear and desperation. I'd like to try making decisions based on choice, even if I'm not sure what those choices should be. Marco nodded slowly. That's fair. Take the money, take time, figure out what you want without pressure. What about you? Elena asked. What do you want? The question seemed to surprise him. Marco was quiet for a long moment. I want to build something that lasts. A business empire that's primarily legitimate, that creates real value. I want to gradually separate myself from people like Costa and Benedetti, rely less on their networks and more on my own merit. That's a long-term goal. 5 years, maybe 10. Slowly transition from who I am to who I'd rather be. He paused. And I want employees I can trust, people who understand the world I operate in but maintain their own ethics anyway. Elena heard the implication. You want me to keep working for you. I want you to consider it, not as a translator trapped by an NDA, but as a consultant who chooses to work with me because the compensation is fair and the terms are acceptable. Marco's voice was measured. I can offer you steady work, excellent pay, and protection from anyone who might threaten you. In exchange, you provide translation services, cultural consultation, and the perspective of someone who still has a conscience. A conscience you can rent when needed? Elena's tone was sharp. A conscience I can listen to when I'm tempted to make compromises I shouldn't. Marco's honesty was disarming. You stopped me from dismissing the trafficking shipment, made me face what I was tolerating by doing business with Costa. I need that. People in my position usually surround themselves with yes men who never challenge them. That's how you become a monster. Elena absorbed this. So I'd be your moral compass. More like a trusted advisor who happens to have functioning ethics. Marco's slight smile was self-deprecating. Think about it. You don't have to decide now. Take the money, take time, And if you're interested in 6 months or a year, call me. The hotel appeared ahead. Their time in Italy was ending, the contract nearly complete. Elena felt the weight of decisions still unmade, futures still uncertain. In the lobby, Marco handed her a folder. Everything you need for tomorrow's flight. We leave at 10 a.m. And Elena, regardless of what you decide about future work, you should know that you've impressed me. Your skill, your integrity under pressure, your ability to navigate dangerous situations without losing yourself. That's rare. Thank you. Elena took the folder, their fingers brushing briefly. For everything, the job, the protection, taking down Greco. All of it. You earned every bit of it. Marco's eyes held hers. Get some rest. Tomorrow we close this chapter. In her room, Elena stood at the window one last time, looking out at Florence. Somewhere in this city, her grandmother was buried beside her parents. Somewhere, Antonio Greco sat in a cell facing justice. Somewhere, Elena's past waited, not erased, but no longer controlling her future. She thought about Marco's offer. Working for him would mean staying in this morally complex world, continuing to witness and facilitate things that made her uncomfortable. But it would also mean choosing that life deliberately, with full knowledge and fair compensation. Not survival, but choice. The question was whether she could maintain her integrity while operating in shadows, whether she could be useful to Marco without becoming what she feared, someone who rationalized everything, who stopped seeing the harm, who traded conscience for comfort. Elena didn't have answers yet, but for the first time in years she had the luxury of time to find them. The flight back to New York the next morning was quiet. Marco worked on his laptop while Elena read, both of them comfortable in silence. They'd shared too much in the past 10 days for small talk to feel necessary. As Manhattan appeared below them, Elena felt the strange dislocation of returning to a city that felt less like home than Florence had. She'd been Elena Moretti here, invisible and afraid. Now she was Elena Rossini again, legally and actually. The question was who Elena Rossini would choose to become. At JFK, Marco's driver waited with the car. They drove into Manhattan together, the city overwhelming and indifferent as always. Your payment will transfer this evening, Marco said as they approached Elena's apartment building in Queens. Along with a bonus, another $15,000. You exceeded expectations significantly. Elena's eyes widened. That's not necessary. It's earned. Consider it hazard pay for dealing with Costa and Benedetti. Marco's expression was serious. Also, I've arranged for your apartment lease to be paid through the end of the year. Gives you time to decide where you want to be without financial pressure. Marco, that's too much. It's investment in someone valuable. If you decide to work with me again, I want you available and stable, not desperate. He handed her a business card. My personal number. Not the office line, not an assistant, direct access. If you need anything, references for other jobs, help with Greco's trial, protection from anyone, call me. The car stopped outside her building. The driver retrieved her luggage from the trunk, setting it on the sidewalk. Elena stood on the familiar pavement, looking up at the walk-up she'd called home for 2 years. It seemed smaller now, less significant. She turned to Marco, still sitting in the car. What happens now? She asked. Now you live your life, make your choices, figure out who you want to be. Marco's slight smile was genuine. And if you decide you want to work with me again, you know how to reach me. And if I don't? Then I wish you well and mean it. His expression was sincere. You don't owe me anything beyond what the contract specified, and that's fulfilled. Whatever comes next is entirely your decision. Elena nodded slowly, then impulsively leaned into the car and kissed his cheek. Thank you for everything. Marco looked surprised but recovered quickly. You're welcome. Take care of yourself, Elena. She watched the car drive away, then carried her luggage up the familiar stairs. Inside her apartment, everything was exactly as she'd left it 10 days ago. But Elena herself was completely different. She checked her bank account that evening. $40,000 had been transferred, the original $25,000 plus the bonus Marco promised. More money than she'd had in her entire life. Over the next week, Elena focused on practical matters. She called Inspector Benetti in Florence, confirming she'd return for testimony if needed. She researched legitimate translation services in New York, updating her professional credentials. She visited her bank, opening a proper investment account rather than keeping everything in checking. And she thought about who she was, who she'd been, who she wanted to become. 3 weeks after returning from Italy, Elena received a call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously. Miss Rossini, this is David Chen, General Counsel for DeLuca International Consulting. Mr. DeLuca asked me to reach out regarding a potential employment opportunity. Elena's heart quickened. I'm listening. We're expanding our European operations and need a senior cultural consultant and translator. The position would involve occasional travel, primarily to Italy and France, facilitating business meetings and providing strategic advice on international ventures. Compensation would be $120,000 annually, plus benefits and travel expenses. It was a staggering salary for translation work. It was also clearly Marco's way of making a formal offer, giving her the choice without pressure. The position would require discretion regarding sensitive business information, Chen continued, but it would be entirely legitimate work. No NDAs beyond standard corporate confidentiality agreements. You'd have full employee protections, benefits, legal support. What kind of businesses would I be facilitating? Elena asked carefully. Primarily technology consulting, manufacturing partnerships, investment opportunities. Mr. DeLuca has been restructuring his client base toward more transparent operations. Chen's voice was professional, factual. I should mention that I've reviewed all of Mr. DeLuca's current contracts and business relationships. Everything falls within legal parameters, even if some clients operate in morally gray areas. And the travel expectations? Approximately 1 week per month, sometimes more during intensive project periods. But you'd have input on scheduling and could decline specific assignments if they made you uncomfortable. Elena processed this. It was everything Marco had promised: fair compensation, legitimate work, room for her own ethics and boundaries. Can I have time to consider? She asked. Of course. Mr. DeLuca said to tell you there's no pressure and no deadline. The position is yours if and when you want it. After hanging up, Elena sat with the decision. Taking the job meant staying connected to Marco's world, witnessing and facilitating things that would sometimes challenge her conscience. But it also meant choosing that involvement deliberately, with protections and boundaries she'd negotiated. She thought about her grandmother's last words. Live. Really live. Hiding had been survival. Disappearing would be safety, but neither was really living. The next morning, Elena called a different number, Rossetti Industries in Milan. When Franco Rossetti answered, she spoke clearly. Mr. Rossetti, this is Elena Rossini. You offered me a position when we met. I'd like to discuss it further, but I need to be transparent about my current situation and other offers. They talked for an hour. Rossetti was direct, professional, and genuinely interested in her skills rather than her connections. The position would be legitimate, well-paid, entirely above board. It would also mean relocating to Italy permanently, building a career in a single company, leaving Marco's world entirely behind. Elena thanked him and promised to make a decision within a month. That evening, she called Marco's personal number. He answered on the second ring. Elena, good to hear from you. I got your job offer, through your attorney. Her voice was steady. And? And I'm considering it carefully, along with other options. She paused. But I need to understand something first. If I take your offer, will you listen when I tell you something is wrong? Will you actually let me maintain boundaries? Yes. No hesitation, no qualification. I told you before, I need someone who'll challenge me when I'm making decisions I shouldn't. That only works if I actually listen. What about when listening costs you money or opportunities? Then I weigh the cost against my conscience and make a choice. But I can't make good choices without good information and honest perspective. Marco's voice was serious. I'm not promising I'll always agree with you, but I promise I'll always hear you and consider seriously before deciding. Elena looked out her window at the Queen's skyline. I also got an offer from Rossetti Industries, completely legitimate work in Milan. I know. He called to ask for a reference. I gave you an excellent one. Marco paused. Elena, I meant what I said. You don't owe me your future. If Rossetti's offer is better for you, take it. Better how? It pays less, but it's entirely clean. Your offer pays more, but keeps me connected to your world. Then the question is which version of yourself you want to be. The one who plays it safe, or the one who operates in complexity while trying to maintain integrity. That's not fair, Elena said. Both versions have integrity. They just express it differently. You're right. I'm sorry. Marco's voice softened. Take whatever job makes you feel whole. That's the only metric that matters. Elena sat with that for a long moment. Can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Do you ever feel whole? Operating in your world, making the compromises you make? Marco was silent for several heartbeats. Sometimes. When I stop something like Costa's trafficking shipment, when I help someone like you get justice against someone like Greco, those moments, I feel like maybe the compromises are worth it. He paused. Other times I feel like I'm just rationalizing corruption with extra steps. His honesty was disarming, as always. Thank you for telling me the truth. It's all I can offer you. The truth about who I am and what working with me entails. Marco's voice was quiet. Whatever you decide, I respect it. Just make sure it's actually what you want, not what you think you should want. After hanging up, Elena spent the evening writing, not for any purpose, just clarifying her thoughts on paper. What she valued, what she feared, what she wanted her life to mean. By midnight, she had her answer. The next morning, she called Marco back. I'll take your position, with conditions. Name them. His voice was alert, engaged. I want quarterly reviews where we assess whether my role is still aligned with my values. If I ever feel I'm being asked to compromise too much, I can leave with 3 months severance and a clean reference. Agreed. I want transparency about the clients I'll be working with. Not every detail, but enough to make informed decisions about my involvement. Done. And I want your word that if I tell you something crosses a line, you'll seriously consider my perspective even if it costs you business. You have it? Marco's voice was solemn, promising. Then I accept. When do I start? 2 weeks. That gives you time to handle any personal business and us time to set up proper employment paperwork. He paused. Elena, thank you for trusting me with this. Thank you for giving me a real choice. Elena smiled despite herself. I'll see you in 2 weeks. She hung up feeling lighter, more certain than she had in years. This wasn't a perfect choice, but it was an honest one, made with full knowledge and clear boundaries. Elena called Rossetti next, thanking him for the opportunity but explaining she'd accepted another position. He was gracious, understanding, and told her the offer would remain open if she ever changed her mind. Then she called Inspector Benetti in Florence, confirming she'd return for Greco's trial. The testimony was scheduled for 3 months away. Elena would face her abuser in court, tell her truth publicly, and watch justice finally be served. The weeks before starting her new job passed in productive routine. Elena took Italian classes to keep her skills sharp, attended professional networking events for translators, and slowly built a life that felt like choice rather than survival. She also stayed in touch with Marco. Occasional texts and calls that felt less like employer-employee communication and more like genuine connection. He asked her opinion on potential clients, shared articles about international business he thought she'd find interesting, and once sent her a link to a gallery show in Florence featuring her favorite artist. When her first day arrived, Elena dressed professionally and took the subway to Marco's Manhattan office. The building was elegant without being ostentatious, the kind of place that suggested success without advertising it. Marco's assistant greeted her warmly and showed her to a spacious office with a view of Central Park. A laptop, phone, and welcome packet waited on the desk. Marco appeared in the doorway, professional and focused. Welcome to DeLuca International Consulting. Ready to get started? Absolutely. Elena settled into her chair, feeling the rightness of the decision settle into her bones. Over the next 6 months, she traveled to Italy, France, and Germany, facilitating business deals and providing cultural consultation. The work was challenging, occasionally morally complex, but never crossed the line she'd established. When clients like Benedetti reached out seeking her services, Marco respected her refusal and found alternative translators. She testified at Greco's trial, delivering clear, unflinching testimony about his harassment and abuse. He was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 18 years in prison. Afterward, Elena stood outside the Florence courthouse, free in ways she'd never imagined possible. And when Costa's name came up during a business discussion, Elena expressed concern about his methods. Marco listened, asked questions, and ultimately declined to deepen that particular business relationship. "You were right," he told her over coffee after the meeting. "Some connections cost more than they're worth. I'd rather build slower with cleaner partners." Elena smiled. "That's growth." "That's you, actually, keeping me honest." Marco's expression was warm, genuine. "Thank you for that." A year after taking the position, Elena sat in her New York apartment, a nicer place in Manhattan now, comfortable and chosen, and reflected on how far she'd traveled. Literally from Italy to America and back, but also metaphorically from hiding to choosing, from victim to agent of her own life. She'd learned that integrity wasn't about avoiding complexity. It was about navigating complexity while maintaining your core values. She'd learned that good people could operate in bad systems while trying to make them incrementally better. And she'd learned that trust, real trust, was built through consistent action over time. Marco had proven trustworthy not through promises but through behavior. When she said no, he listened. When she expressed concerns, he took them seriously. When she needed support, he provided it without expecting reciprocity. And Elena had proven to herself that she could survive and thrive without hiding, without being invisible, without giving up her voice. Her phone rang. Marco's number. "Hey, what's up?" "I'm planning a trip to Florence next month. Legitimate business, tech consulting for a manufacturing firm. Thought you might want to come along, maybe visit your family's graves while we're there." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'd like that." "Good. I'll have the assistant book your travel." A pause. "Elena?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you took the job. Glad you're here." His voice was quiet, sincere. "You've made everything better, not just the work, but me. Who I am, the choices I make. Thank you for that." Elena smiled, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. "Thank you for giving me the chance to choose. That's what made all the difference." After hanging up, she opened her laptop and began preparing for the Florence trip. She'd visit her grandmother's grave, bring flowers, and tell Lucia everything that had happened. About choosing truth over hiding, agency over fear, complicated integrity over simple safety. She'd tell her grandmother that she was living, really living, and that sometimes the most important choice wasn't between good and bad, but between fear and courage, between hiding from the world and engaging with it, even when that engagement required difficult compromises and careful boundaries. Elena had chosen engagement, chosen to operate in complex spaces while maintaining her values, chosen to trust carefully but genuinely, chosen to build a life that was honest about its complications rather than pretending they didn't exist. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was hers, fully and completely, claimed rather than given, chosen rather than assigned, lived rather than merely survived. And that, Elena thought as she worked late into the evening preparing for the Florence trip, was enough, more than enough. It was everything she'd promised her grandmother and herself. The story that had begun with a frightened waitress answering a phone call in Italian ended with a confident woman booking first-class tickets to Florence, planning business meetings and personal pilgrimages in equal measure, comfortable in the skin of someone who'd survived fear and chosen complexity over safety. Elena Rossini had come home to herself, and she was never hiding again.